they used to do these imbizos in the early 2000s, and you'd say, regardless of what happens, there would always be someone that says, I don't know where it says in the Constitution that this shouldn't be happening in my community. After this election, between now and the next local elections, how would you hold a politician accountable? I think politicians have a good heart. I think they care about people. Some of them might be corrupt whilst they care. I think what the ANC really wanted was enough people to move out really quickly. So you narrow the amount of people you need to talk to.
Because you don't need a lot.
You don't need a lot. I would be surprised if the ANC doesn't partner up with IFP in one way or another. Partially, if one could say, as like a national security concern as well.
King David Studio podcast.
I'm with Chikane in the studio. We've known the Reverend Chikane.
Yeah.
Even when I was with you on the radio, I made reference to the Reverend Chikane. He's your dad, right?
Yeah, he's my dad.
There's a resemblance. You're just smaller.
I like saying that I'm like the handsome of his three sons. That's how I mark myself off. Because I used to be like, no, I'm more handsome than my dad. And then I see photos of him in his 30s. Casanova, that one.
Oh, shut 10 million.
Amen.
10 million. Wow. It's such a pleasure, man, to have you. I've seen so much of you over the few days and weeks because of, the analysis that you were doing with them. Was it Newsroom Africa in particular?
Yeah.
I remember there was a particular, I'll call it an episode for lack of a better reference, where you were kept there for 3 hours. I said, "Jeez, you're the co-presenter."
The shifts are long.
They are long.
Yeah, they call us the friends of the host. And I mean, huge respect to Newsroom. I mean, I've been quite with them for all these major events for about 4 years at this point.
Okay, yeah.
And they keep inviting me back, which means clearly I'm doing something right.
They're
Otherwise, they're not watching the episodes. I'm not entirely sure which one it is. But it's like 3 hours, but it goes real quick when you're there.
And also when you're discussing these topics, when you walked in, you said, geez, your episodes are long. I don't feel them. I don't feel the length.
Yeah.
And my guests don't feel the length.
Yeah.
But sometimes I see the comments. That much I'll tell
When you're
you.
sitting at home and you're watching that YouTube and you're wondering, like, we're only halfway through.
and however, there are people who watch them full length at once and say, I didn't feel it,
Yeah.
So I guess it's the conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah. I brought you here really to talk about where the country is now. It's an interesting time. There's words like seismic shift that have been bandied about over the past few weeks and days. Is that a true reflection? Or are we making a mountain out of a molehill?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of talk before the election that this was 2024 is our 1994. And so I must be very clear about this because there's people who are holding me accountable. For the longest time, I always made the comment of, all these elections don't matter until 2029. Because in my mind, 2029 would be when the ANC loses. That was like my analysis of like just steady decline that they were having, regardless of like all the chaos that happened in the country. Their fall was always like 4%, 4%.
So it looked like it'll be another...
It'll be like another shift. It would have been a bigger than 4%, but I still had them at like 49, 50. But that type of margin of like, I just need one partner or I have a majority, one of the two. But nothing seismic the way that we saw. Yeah. But you could see the writing on the wall beforehand, right? So you had... We haven't seen the numbers. At least I haven't seen the numbers of youth turnout in particular for the elections. But what we do know is that young people registered en masse for the first time, right? But it becomes this tricky question of voter turnout was still low. So we're wondering, like, who came out to vote? One province in particular had the highest turnout, but I'm sure we'll get there just now. But you had the most amount of officials contesting. You had the most amount of political parties contesting. You had high registration numbers, the highest the country's seen in a very, very long time. So you've created this environment.
You had a former president.
And you had a former president that came, can we ever say from the ashes? I feel like he never comes from the ashes. He's forever a phoenix. He's just always shining. There. He's always there. Yeah. You had the former president contesting. You had the EFF believing to themselves that we will become the official opposition. You had a DA party that was really trying to figure out who are we as a party going forward post My Money, that we've now taken the shift to go back to our base, and can we grow from our base? You get FF Plus essentially saying we stole the votes from the DA during the last election. Can we hold those votes of urban Afrikaans voters. Yet IFP wondering, what did we do to deserve this?
And again, also finding themselves in
Exactly.
a bit of a haze because of the departure of a very strong leader.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? So you have a lot of these different moving pieces that made this election a bit different. But the major piece, which one we're not talking about enough, is how low the voter turnout was, that essentially stunted everyone, but allowed one person, or at least two parties, to really come out fighting out of their corner. And I think it's exciting. I think it is seismic, obviously, now, because now we entered this age of coalitions at a national level. And I guess the fear is, we've seen what happens at a local level. Does that happen at a national level as well?
It's such a fear for a lot of people. You listen to radio, talk radio in particular, the common commentary is, I live in Tshwane. You know the chaos here. I live in Ekurhuleni. You know the chaos here. And that's, Johannesburg and the Eastern Cape. There's so many parts of this where the common South African says, I've seen this before, and it doesn't look good.
You know what's interesting about that? So there was a study that came out by Mistra, right? And Mistra really did this analysis about coalitions in the country. So we often think that the coalitions are like Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, City of Joburg, Nelson Mandela Bay. But there's 77 coalition governments across this country. The vast majority of them just go about their business. There's a few tensions here and there, but the stakes are lower, right? And all due respect to all local municipalities across the country, but we know there's category A, category B, category C.
Metros.
Right? So metros, the big ones. And what we're seeing in the major metros is this kind of infighting, right, that inhibits the ability for government to provide services in an efficient manner. Not that as if services disappear completely, but it could be better. And that anxiety, that fear translates to what might happen at a national level. But the stakes are just different at a national level. So like national government doesn't deal with service delivery, right? Local government deals with like making sure that from my house, there's a pipe, there's water that comes in. For major metros, even there, like the provision of electricity is done by some sort of city power, for instance, right? At a national level, we're talking about the entity that essentially designs and architects how the system should function. That essentially says, in order for that to function, we need to make sure that coal gets from point A to point B, right? The logistics of the country. The stakes are higher when we're talking about not your day-to-day needs, right? For your I wake up in the morning, is there transport, is there water, is there electricity?
Is my garbage collected? It's all of that.
National government is, what's my livelihood looking like in the next 6 to 12 months? Those are the issues that they're taking care of. To go have that be thrown into chaos, that's a frightening thing, right? Because the repercussions of that isn't about an inconvenience, right? For certain South Africans, it is a life or death type issue. But it also creates the opportunity, and this is what I like telling people, for accountability for the first time in a really tangible way that everyone's voices can get represented. And I think we need to take the pros with the cons, right? Before we only had kind of one system, one rules of the game, and now we have something a bit different. And for me, that's exciting, at least.
Do you find that South Africans don't quite understand how government works in that context, based on what you just said?
Yeah, I think South Africans, no. I think, I always like the story my dad used to tell me. And it was, they used to do these imbizos in the early 2000s. And he would say, regardless of what happens, there would always be someone that says, I don't know where it says in the Constitution that this shouldn't be happening in my community, but this Constitution is supposed to protect me. So most South Africans have an intrinsic idea that the Constitution and government is there to protect them, right? To make sure that their lives are not destitute, to make sure that their livelihoods are protected. We get that general idea. The mechanisms of government becomes a bit blurry, but it's not something I expect every single South African to know.
To get,
right? It's not something, you don't need to know how the car's engine functions to know how to drive the car.
True.
And I know I must get from point to A to point B. I think when it comes to knowing the intricacies of government, I don't think citizens need to know, but we're now finding out that we need to know exactly where it says in the Constitution that I need something or my rights should be protected. Because all of government is framed within there. We can talk about, people talk about like professionalization of the civil service, right? The technicalities of what that looks like about training, skills audits, et cetera, et cetera. You don't need to know that. What you do need to know is No, but if you are a civil servant, you can't also just be following political instructions through and through to the bitter end, even when they are to the disservice of citizens.
And also you as a consumer, a citizen who gets service from this professional, you need to know how the level of expectation that should be met whenever you need the service.
Yeah, and you need civil servants to also be able to communicate that, right? So what we can't have in our society, so things that citizens generally don't know, is that you can have a minister sitting in a selection panel for someone who's 4 positions below them, right? To ensure that the right political appointment gets made. And the question is, you are far too busy to be sitting in an interview panel.
Yes,
I mean, honestly.
For some junior,
like deputy director, mang, like that shouldn't be where your job should be. When you create a culture in which the entire the entire department functions off that logic that we need to make sure the right people who always side with us are always appointed, you then pervert the entire system. And citizens don't see those appointments, but they see the ramifications of it.
Let's talk about that very concept of ramification.
Yeah.
Because when I say confusion or not quite understanding how government works, they don't know where to apportion the blame.
Yeah.
When something goes wrong. We are in Gauteng, which is led by a 2-seat or 2% mayor. And that 2% mayor is overseeing, based on our expectation, this entire province, rather this entire city. When they don't do well, potholes, whatever, we then say government. And when we use the word government, the phrase government, we imagine Cyril Ramaphosa. Do you see how that happens pretty much across the country? And if I'm wrong in my observation, do correct me. But is my logic making some sense?
No, completely. Let's use water, for instance. So Joburg is experiencing water shortages across kind of like the city. So there's kind of 3 entities we need to think about who you blame in this situation. So the problem is I don't have water. That's the problem.
I open my tap, nothing happens.
So who do I blame? Well, there's one, I can either blame Joburg Water, local government, Rand Water, which is more provincial, National Treasury. Now, the way it functions...
In our case, we have a Department of Water.
Or Department of Water, but in this situation, it is why National Treasury in this situation is who gives the money to Rand Water. Right? Where the Department of Water Affairs will essentially say, these are the types of allocations. National Treasury must say, do I give you that money or not? Right? So you have the situation of National Treasury is trying to give money to Rand Water, but isn't giving enough money to Rand Water. Then you have a situation of Rand Water, which is supposed to sell the water to Joburg Water, right? So Rand Water must make sure that it sells enough water to Joburg Water. Joburg Water is then supposed to distribute it to people.
Sell it to us.
Yeah. They collect revenue. They pay back Rand Water. Rand Water goes back to National Treasury and says, look, we made money. That's how the system's supposed to function. So when you don't have water, the question then becomes, is it because the negotiations between Rand Water and Joburg Water went badly, right? So they miscalculated how much water should be delivered. Well, there you can kind of say, okay, local government, provincial government. Then you get to Joburg Water and you say, but is the problem because you haven't maintained the pipes in the community?
The reservoirs are in
bad shape. There's leakages, right? That this entire supply chain creates many different avenues to blame someone, all the way up to National Treasury to say, National Treasury, did you give enough money for the provision of water for Gauteng for 2024? It becomes extremely hard for a citizen to place that blame. The way I like explaining it is blame local government first and foremost. For like service delivery things of there's no water in my tap. Because Joburg Water's responsibility is to then hold all the other structures of government accountable. Because it goes back to this thing that I think we've all forgotten. We always minimize local government. But technically the language of government is that there's 3 spheres of government, not like 3 levels. There's local, national, provincial. And all of these levels are supposed to hold each other accountable.
There's no layer.
There's no hierarchy.
That is higher.
The only hierarchy is that we've got the piggy bank sits with National Treasury. That becomes the big one. But if you're in a metro that is able to collect its own revenue, right, that you don't have to become dependent on National Treasury's allocation, you can then go back to these other institutions and say, no, you guys are not doing your jobs and you're not serving our citizens at a local level. And you create that accountability mechanism across spheres of governance. But, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, when you have one party, and I'm neither here nor there about parties, I hope everyone, but when you have one party that can control all three levels, it becomes hard for one party to hold itself accountable, if that makes sense.
100%.
Right? It becomes hard to essentially say, how do we apportion accountability mechanisms across these three levels of government? So the more you have diversity across all three spheres, whether it's local, provincial, national, the more likely you are to be able to pin the blame on someone in a manner that citizens can see. The only problem that you have is that you then also create the likelihood of people fighting with each other over petty things.
Here's why this matters, because it reflects in elections.
Yeah.
We don't vote for you because you said you're going to give us water.
Yeah.
And we open our taps, there was no water. And when you were saying this, you were running for national office.
Yeah.
So our expectation is pretty clear.
Yes.
You said
you said this to me.
Yeah. and at some point, we understood that at national level, it was you, same colors.
Yeah.
At provincial level, same colors.
Yeah.
At local government, same colors.
Yeah.
So our expectation is pretty clear.
That you guys are at least all sitting in one room.
We assume you're friends. We assume you're boys. You assume you know exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
And that became part of how we saw things for a long time. And that's why I always said, I think some of ANC's biggest problem is a branding crisis. Than it is when your brand is so tarnished.
Yes.
That whatever you do
doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. So that's why I say apportioning blame is one thing, but also when you've created an expectation as a whole government system, we don't have the time to
Nor should we.
decode who's the one. You know what I mean? And you said it in a lot of ways that we should not be involved.
Yeah.
This machine must work.
I mean, if you have the system that we have, right, which, can I say this? I'm not a fan of the kind of 100% closed list PR system, proportional representation, because it creates this kind of problem that you have that I myself can't hold you accountable for anything. It means that we almost, some people will not like me for using this term, we outsource the responsibility of holding people accountable to the party itself. That the party must be able to hold itself accountable, its officials accountable, and its politicians accountable. That will not be our responsibility. We simply gave you a mandate to go do the right thing. And I think that system of itself contributes to this in one way or another.
How, for example?
So you become completely benevolent on what I describe to my students on the goodness of a politician's heart.
Sure.
So I always describe it as there's no way. I can ask you this question. After this election, between now and the next local elections, how would you hold a politician accountable? In a manner that would put the fear of God in them. As if I don't listen to you today, something bad will happen. Whether I'm out, whether I get fined, but something will happen to me. Therefore, I must be responsive.
Our institutions that are supposed to do that and that are created by our constitution seem not to be strong enough to look after us in that regard.
Exactly. So you would hope that the legislature, which is supposed to represent people, would go do that. When you talk
public protector,
or let's put the public protector, we're talking about like the straight up politicians.
Okay. Yeah.
So the legislature, so many people will tell you that I give public comments, to policies that come out. And I always love asking people, can you see your comments in the document? Like where in the document do you see your comment? And most people will say, no, it wasn't there, right? When you ask the question of whether you're an individual or not, we can use another one, IDPs. I love discussions of IDPs. Yeah. So the Integrated Development Plan is local government's plan for what we're going to do for the next 5 years. Last year, I found myself at a meeting with all the politicians kind of talking about coalitions. And they kept using this language of, we want to sort out the coalition politics and institutional arrangements so that we know who is in charge of the local municipality so we can deliver our policy mandates. And they were talking like that, which is a norm on paper, sounds
Makes
perfectly
sense,
fine.
yeah.
And then I put up my hand and I said, no, man, but your policy mandate, technically, legislatively, is supposed to be informed by the IDP. And the IDP is informed by your discussions with communities for 6 months after the elections, where you take everyone's comments and then you decide what we're going to do based on everyone's comments.
Town halls.
So if you already have a policy mandate that you want to do, why are you making us do an IDP process in the first place?
So you're essentially already saying, we're done. We don't
We're
need to
done.
listen to them.
All this public consultation is a tick box exercise. And citizens don't need to know politics to recognize that this is a tick box exercise, which is why people retreat from public participation mechanisms. It's why we see the amount of protest activities. Protests are usually indicative of the actual arena or venue for policy debate is not for you anymore. You're not accepted there, or you're not listened to. So I need to use another venue called protests to get your attention. We see this, right? Citizens are not foolish. And I like reminding South Africans, like, we see our rebellion from the system clear as daylight. We might not have all the words to kind of say, no, it's because we're not participating in the IDP, but people recognize that the normal processes we have don't function. And it goes all the way back to we are at the benevolent of politicians' hearts. And that's the way the system has been designed. And it's not good or bad, right? It is what it is. So the question then is, how do you change that culture, right? So that politicians can be held accountable, that they do feel that fear of God. Now, I don't know if our current electoral system can do it, but I also wasn't expecting us to get into coalitions. So we'll see, maybe the coalitions will kind of bring that culture of accountability, because now you do need to talk to people. You need to make sure that you always carry a mandate when you're speaking in parliament from a clear constituency, which we just don't have in this country.
Can we assume that we have created an environment where, and the way you phrase it is pretty, it's 100% how I see it, where we've created politicians that are inherently good to their people. They care for their people. They think about their people first.
Yeah.
And that's how the system is designed. Did it make a wrong assumption, the system, when it was designed?
So I always call it this difference between kind of winner takes all versus power sharing. So what we've seen from like the coalitions so far is a political culture of winner takes all, right? So in my mind, I firmly believe, because I don't like wishing ill on people or thinking people are like conniving against the country. All I believe is that people have different approaches to what they want to do in the country. And that's okay.
And very often you find that those approaches are different, however they're trying to solve the same problem.
We're solving the same problem.
Yes.
We could both look at ESCOM and come to two fundamentally different, so long as we're both thinking about how to solve the ESCOM problem. It's if you're not even thinking about that, then I'm like, no, then
I guess you are.
then we can
here.
move you on
You're
the
not
side.
one of us. Yes.
But when you have the situation of one party kind of dominating for a very long time, the opportunity to get power from them, to push your own electoral mandate, to push your own kind of thought process around what governance would look like, what service delivery looks like, creates a culture of winner takes all, right? Which is what we're seeing in the more chaotic coalitions in metros of it's just about who can get power, who can get the right position, who can win this political fight.
Yeah.
But coalitions, by definition, are about power sharing. It's not about winner takes all. It's about inherently compromising on positions. And compromising essentially means that no one dominant view will essentially come into play. And the question for me about the political culture in our country, I think politicians have a good heart. I think they care about people. Some of them might be corrupt whilst they care, but that's a conversation for another day. But they
walk
care.
in caring.
Yeah.
They get corrupted by the system.
By the system. But the political culture that they find themselves in is about winner takes all. And to be winner takes all in our system, you have to be loyal to your party. You can't do power sharing by yourself.
You need a collective.
Right? You need that collective voice. It's why ANC is so amazing. I love the ANC, man. Because they've created the political culture of this country. Every party in this country believes in the concept of democratic centralism, right? Because of the system that we're in, that if the leader says something, we decide, we must all follow. We can't have dissenting voices as we go along. You could have the DA being its most liberal organization as possible, but when the federal executive makes a decision, don't you dare speak out of turn.
Yeah.
Because you'll find yourself out of this party. That's a deeply held ANC tradition that you can find all the way back to MK days.
Yeah.
Right? It brought that culture in of we toe the line, we will always put the party first, and if the party's logic is winner takes all, that's when citizens' concerns then start missing. Right? Where the most well-intentioned politician is just functioning within a system where I need to listen to my party, and my party's logic is beat the other guy.
The current party logic is government of national unity. I've seen people whom I thought if you found them, if you woke them up in the morning, in the middle of the night and asked them, they'll say, no, I don't agree with that nonsense. But I've had them vouch for it in the past few days. And I remember thinking, I didn't expect it from you. And I guess it speaks to that very notion that party line is where we go. But party line doesn't seem to work for citizens.
No. So we're going to have, I'm fascinated to see what happens, right? So government of national unity, the current iteration, so not the 1994 one. Which
we'll talk about that because people tend to compare.
Yeah, these are two very different
but
things.
We'll talk about them. Yes.
This one is, it's another word for a coalition. That's really what it is.
I think it's wrong phrasing.
I think the ANC purposefully, and I think it was a good call by the ANC, right? The ANC was on the back foot last week. They were firmly on the back foot, right? They had just got punched in the face, right? And they were still dizzy about what's going on, trying to figure themselves out.
Yeah.
And I think after the NEC meeting and the National Working Committee met, I think they finally came back and realized, no, man, we have leverage here. The issue that we're facing is choosing a coalition partner is putting us in a bad light. If we say we're going with the DA, it's putting us in a bad light.
And now we know that.
Yeah. If we're going with the EFF, it's putting us in a bad light and the markets are reacting in a funny way. If we can't go with MK because we can't go with MK. And the ANC's position, I think, was a masterstroke if the other parties worked effectively, which was, we'll invite all of you. You must choose to leave. We won't kick you out.
You decide.
You must decide on your own volition that you don't want to be part of this thing. Therefore, we can't then be painted as choosing a side. We said we wanted to do this together and you chose to go by yourself. And I think that was a masterstroke, but it really depended on when the parties then asked, the opposition parties then say, but give us the details of what it means to stay with you. Like, what does that exactly mean going forward? And then you have a situation where inadvertently, the ANC's forced the DA and EFF, who already don't like each other, to now publicly state again how much they don't like each other. And you must become the referee of the situation. And I think what the ANC really wanted was enough people to move out really quickly. So you narrow the amount of people you need to talk to.
Because you don't need a lot.
You don't need a lot.
Yeah.
But now you have too many people. A friend described it to me. I'm not sure if I use it on your show or not. But they use the phrase of like, it's the equivalent of... Actually, no, let me save that analogy for later.
Use it. We might forget to use it.
No, it's having too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yes.
It's that fundamental question of you have too many people trying to make decisions, but some cooks don't realize that there's a chef and there's a sous chef.
The rest are...
You're
right? Assistants.
You're just assistants.
Yes.
And the sous chef maybe can talk to the chef. And it was about ANC realizing last week that it is the chef. Whether we like it or not, they have 40%. And everyone else then needs to accept, I can't be the chef. Unless I can get all the other sous chefs and all the other assistants to revolt, it's just not possible. So I think what we're seeing now in this kind of government of national unity, at least during this week, is this nitty-gritty of what does it mean to come together? And I think what we need to be aware of is that this is a short-term solution to what is essentially a long-term problem.
Do you think they are the powers that be, wherever they are right now, are aware that this is a short-term solution?
So you know what would be a good one? And we'll see this very, very quickly if the VF Plus does what they said they're going to do. So FF Plus, clear, came out, they said, we're going to reintroduce this Phala Phala thing to Parliament.
They already said that.
They already said it.
They're playing their card.
This thing, we're playing our card. Now, the question about any coalition is, do you have these new... I love South Africa so much. we have this new language now of confidence and supply.
Mm-hmm.
No one had heard the term confidence and supply before this week. But as a quick one, confidence and supply is we give confidence in the government. So essentially, we won't, there'll be no vote of no confidence against the president.
We will ensure that the stability.
The stability of the
Yes.
country holds together.
Uh-huh.
And then supply is we'll vote on the budget.
Yeah.
So supply of money, essentially. That's really the basic principles of like the short-term thing. All of these coalitions right now, they're not discussing the budget. They're talking about policy things, but like this is a 2 months from now problem, essentially. The problem they're really discussing now is, can we find an agreement that has confidence amongst all of us, so that when the first questioning of this confidence takes place, right, we can all come together and say, no, this is the government.
We are solid.
We're solid.
Yeah.
Whether it is our 60%, whether it's your 51 point what percent, we are solid, we are confident in what's going on. VF Plus so far really has been kind of on the outside of these discussions so far. If they come back and they say, here's the Phala Phala scandal, we want to put this investigation to see if we can initiate, because the processes have changed, to see if we can initiate an investigation of impeachment or a vote of no confidence in the president. That will be the first test of this confidence. Now you're going to have a fascinating situation. So let's play kind of
Devil's advocate.
or coalition merry-go-round. So
Yes.
let's say the ANC goes with the DA.
Yeah, interesting. You'll notice here, I have a coalition merry-go-round.
Yeah, exactly.
I have different, I call them permutations.
The permutations.
Yes.
So let's go with
start
the first one. Let's say it's ANC DA. You agree on all your policies, even though you, over the last 5 years, you've never voted on the same thing together.
Sometimes even unnecessarily.
Unnecessarily.
Yeah.
Like there's no ideological agreement here. But let's say you find an agreement on certain issues. You say, sharp, let's go. This issue comes up.
Phala Phala.
And we say, and there's people, I view Phala Phala differently. It's like, it's an issue, but it's not an issue at the same time type of thing. Because I'm looking at the institutions telling us there's nothing here.
True.
But then my gut is telling me, but that's too much money in a sofa.
And it's not South African currency.
And it's not South African currency. So it feels funny.
Yeah.
The DA then has to go back to its constituency and say, no, we're protecting the president. After years and years of tons of motions or attempts to remove the president, right? That's the first test of your confidence.
Even the most recent, when Minister Nkosazana Zuma was publicly saying, I don't go with this.
Exactly.
They went against the president.
100%.
So now, basically, it's a few months later, you guys are saying, no, we're good with this guy.
We're good. Based off, absolutely, it's not like you've worked
Nothing's
together
changed.
for months. It's not like you've now proven that, when we work together, we can provide services. This will happen within the first few months, right? Permutation number 2.
Yes. Let me see. What do you have?
Let's say we have ANC, EFF, IFP. IFP is always going to play a role in this elections because of MK's influence in KZN. I would be surprised if the ANC doesn't partner up with IFP in one way or another. Partially, if one could say, as like a national security concern as well, but we could get there.
I want to raise something in this permutation, IFP, and again, I can predict your answer. The president of the IFP said, "We will never put a gun to my head. I will never
not doing this.
Work with these guys." Yeah, and the phrase that he used was, "I cannot rebuild something with people who destroyed it." Yeah, that's the phrase he uses. However, it's a permutation worth putting on the table. Yeah. Because the DA said the same thing, and who knows really what's
politics,
going on.
Man.
Yes.
Winner takes all.
That's it.
Yeah.
So let's assume that permutation is possible.
Yeah.
What do you see?
So let's say you go ANC, EFF, IFP. Right? Because IFP gets you comfortably over the line. ANC really could also go ANC, EFF, and then ACDP, Rise, Bossa.
We'll get there.
We'll give you minister.
We'll get to that because that's a different.
That's a different one.
Let's put this one to bed. Yes.
Creates a level of stability with people you've worked with in the past before. IFP has kind of stabbed the ANC in the back once or twice, but it is what it is.
They say the same.
Yeah, 100%.
They say you stabbed us.
Right? And you have a situation where same question, when that is posed, IFP has a problem because IFP for the last 2 years has said, no, if anyone gets accused in any sort of partnership that we have, they get removed from the party. Right? Hlengo has been talking about this for a while, essentially saying even our own ward council, we removed them ourselves.
True.
And we lost that ward in the next by-election. But we would rather have that than to work with someone implicated in something.
Ooh.
So to do an about turn of that at the level of the president would be a tough choice. So the IFP is now in a tough position. EFF, the chances of watching the EFF defend Cyril Ramaphosa against a no confidence vote would be the complete opposite about what their constituency has been asking for and what they've made their name off of in every single SONA. This thing about holding the president accountable, about not allowing National Assembly. So you've got a fraught position there.
So it's similar to the DA.
It's similar to the DA.
Yeah.
This notion of confidence is so thin, right? It is so thin because as soon as the first issue rocks up, and then we don't need to go into the other permutations, just thinking about the ANC itself. If that happens, the crisis that would ensue is that Cyril Ramaphosa can't come back, for instance, right? His second term is done. He said he would have the shortest second term of any president in this country, right? It would be a couple of months. It means now you need to find a brand new president. You reopen up internal squabbles within the ANC 2 years in advance.
Sure.
We're only like a year and a half before the issues around the national conference will start surfacing. So you bring that whole conversation 2 years in advance, right? Does Paul Mashadida
2 years in advance of their election? 5 years in advance
of national and you must still figure out how to do local elections at the same time.
2 years in advance of local.
All of this is all happening. So you bring their timetable a lot earlier. But then in the past, it was fine because you had a majority. So you could decide amongst yourselves who's going to become president of the country, and we kind of put that name forward. But now you must go negotiate with everyone else again. The same people who broke your confidence a couple months before.
For sure.
And if Parliament then doesn't agree, then the ANC then rightfully so will say, well, we can't form a government. We must have a new election.
That's it. That's essentially.
This is what would happen, right? This confidence thing is what is really critical around whatever agreement that comes in place. There needs to be this understanding. And this is more like maturity. And I come back to chefs and sous chefs. If you're the ANC, not ANC, sorry. If you're the DA, EFF, IFP, MK.
Can't ignore them.
Not ignoring them
Because
at all.
MK can create a government with the ANC.
100%.
Immediately.
100%. Yeah. Overnight. In fact,
tomorrow.
If they could put their personal squabbles aside, it's almost as if the ANC just came back together.
Pretty much.
They just had like a family squabble and there's issues, but now they've come back together and they must just, one person must bend the knee to someone. That's really,
and then we move on.
And then we move on.
Yeah.
Because it's not like MK members are not ANC members. I know a lot of them, Klamulo is going to get so angry with me, but it's not as if all of them are all ANC. But when you look at where those votes came from,
they are ANC votes.
Those are ANC votes, true and true. So that was the easy one, but there's just personality issues there. The confidence issue is going to be so important. If we can't get the parties to recognize, the smaller ones in particular, the sous chefs, MK, DA, IFP, and EFF. I really put them there as the sous chefs. To recognize that you're also a sous chef.
Do you have a say?
Like you have a say, but it's not your kitchen.
You're not the guy.
But this kitchen can't function without you.
Sure.
The chef can't cook by himself or by themselves. That they need your help, but you're not the chef because you also didn't get the 40% in any particular way. So what role do you play in that maturity of making sure the kitchen keeps going forward, that there's confidence that the meals will come out, that there's confidence that policies will be delivered.
Quality will be retained.
Yes.
All of that.
The flip side of this is the responsibility of the ANC is to not put up corrupt individuals. Right?
Well, we've expected that for the past 30 years. Because
and I was tweeting about this earlier, about like the transparency of a coalition agreement. If there's, let's say it wasn't Phala Phala, let's say it's something else. There must be a mechanism for your sous chefs, right? The DAs, the EFFs, of whatever this coalition looks like, to essentially say, our confidence will only be shaken in you under XYZ conditions.
Yeah.
So that even if because there could be so many frivolous motions of no confidence.
And let me tell you, we are heading in that direction.
Exactly.
We are heading at throwing everything.
Yeah, 100%. where we
just
can
to test
just to
this
see
confidence.
see if we can test, because that's exactly what happened in local municipalities when we found out the confidence doesn't hold.
That's what happened when JZ was president.
Mm.
Remember how many the vote of no confidence was
too many
thrown at it.
Right? So you have people who will throw anything and see if it sticks. And to maintain that confidence, you need to be clear about what are the things that are our red lines. That if you get accused of this, and what is the threshold of evidence that we're talking about here? Sure. Right? What is that threshold? So I know there's a bit of a tangent. So let's go back to that first kind of parliament investigation around Phala Phala in particular. Now that came to a particular conclusion that said, there's a plausible case here.
That's the judges.
These are the judges. And I said, no, that's fine. That's interesting. Let me go read this thing. And when you're reading the evidence and you're thinking to yourself, this can't be.
Well, this look far-fetched.
This one is far-fetched. You can't tell me that you're using, in an official document, the PR, not PR statement, the, what do you call this thing? The media announcement from the Namibian president that the President Cyril Ramaphosa was here as evidence of, he was in Namibia, therefore his security team was also in Namibia. Therefore, the security team met up with these guys to go find the people who stole the money. And I'm thinking, that can't be evidence. You can't tell me that is the only evidence you have, but also because that committee wasn't allowed to call certain witnesses.
But remember, you have to bear in mind that inquest was plausibility issues.
Exactly.
Yes, it was.
It's pure. The bar for what is plausible is extremely low.
Yes.
On purpose, because you want Parliament to then, who has the investigative power, to call upon witnesses, because they couldn't call upon. If someone said, I don't want to come, they didn't have to come.
You can't interdict. You
can't interdict, whereas
yes.
Parliament can, right? You create that provisional mechanism to avoid spurious kind of things. But now we've seen it function, that the bar is very low as well. So you could have anyone who chucks something. So the question then becomes, okay, what are our red line issues, and what is the level of evidence that we need to see that allows us to walk away from this confidence that we've created with a clear conscience?
Do you think, and this is a tricky one, because your dad is part of the committee that declared this is okay. So imagine, and I can understand you find yourself conflicted.
We have a Chinese wall on purpose.
I hope so.
Yes,
because you'll find because your dad is in the integrity committee of the ANC. The integrity committee of the ANC said all is well.
Yeah.
Or there's nothing here.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one. Because even you said it yourself that too much money.
It's too much.
Too much money in a couch. Do you think that? And this is something that was written also by former President Thabo Mbeki. And he said, if there's nothing, then why we as the ANC are afraid to test it?
Exactly that.
Because if we don't test it, we give the impression that there's something. If indeed there's nothing, let's put it forward and move on.
For the test.
Yes. So does it say that there could be something?
So there's two things. One is, so I grew up in when you grow up in an ANC house, you hear all the stories. That story of the money in the couch sounds very, very familiar to how people used to move money in the underground.
Okay.
Type of thing. So that form of money transfer and hard cash is not like a foreign thing to people within the ANC.
In that world.
Right. So that's the one thing. The second thing I like always reminding myself is that South Africans think they're rich, but there are people who are actually rich in this country. Where that amount of cash
is nothing.
Is really nothing.
That's true.
It's honest. It's neither here nor there. But because of the inequality in the country, for 98% of us, we can't conceive of that amount of money sitting
in someone's house.
In someone's house.
Yes.
Right? But Cyril Ramaphosa does sit in that type of world. Is that right? Absolutely not, in my mind, right?
Particularly if it's foreign money.
If it's foreign money, right? If it's dollars that are just sitting there, is it right? I don't think so. Is it normal for him? I assume it's normal. Type of thing. For these guys, it's a normal thing.
Unpopular statement. It probably happened before.
100%. Tons of time. It's probably happening in your next door neighbor's house right now.
That's true.
Depending on where you live, obviously. And the third one is, okay, so this is a normal thing we do know people are very capable of doing this because we've shown you had to be able to do this back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's legitimate concerns of like something fishy happened. The question is, do we open up this can of worms?
Mm-hmm.
I am of the belief that if you are in a party that wasn't as confident as the ANC was in its majority, because I always make this point about the ANC, that don't ask the ANC, at least back then, this is now different, don't ask the ANC unfair questions, right? Don't ask them an unfair thing of when you have 57% that you ask them to implode. Like it doesn't, like when someone has a firm majority and you say, no, weaken yourself on purpose.
So you can cleanse yourself.
So you can cleanse yourself. Like that doesn't make any sense because the ANC will always come back and say, no, we are a clear majority from the country.
You can't tell us anything.
Like, what are you talking about?
That's
We're not
true.
doing this.
Yeah.
It's an unfair question to ask them. And in that situation, the clever thing would have been, it is an unfair question to ask us. To make us essentially impeach our own president,
which is you're answering even Thabo Mbeki, by saying
this
that.
is what I would say to him. It's like it's an unfair thing to ask a majority party to purposefully do this, based
and weaken itself
based off what we publicly know. Behind the scenes, there's a more serious conversation about how serious are you about renewal. That becomes a more serious one. But publicly, you can't do that. In my deep respect for President Thabo Mbeki, but you can't expect that to happen on a public level.
Yeah.
But it speaks more coherently about that internal fight within the ANC for renewal. I remember the conversation when I was still a youth league member about the decade of the cadre. I remember being like brought into that and being like, okay, sharp, we're doing this. And now you're getting this 15 years later since that point, is that question of what happened to that renewal? What happened to the voices inside essentially saying, no, we'll vote on our conscience about this. Or we want to see the evidence ourselves. Back to democratic centralism. This is this culture that we've created, that a parliamentarian within the ANC is well within their rights to say, I want to see the evidence.
And they should be allowed.
And they should be allowed to do that without fear that the ANC will then kick them out. But it doesn't make sense because you're the only reason you're on that list in the first place. 100% closed list, proportional representation. By the way, as a side note, we're like one of the only countries in the world that does this. It's like us and New Zealand.
Jeez.
Because the whole world realizes it's like there's one extreme and then there's the other one. And we're like on the far extreme, that people find a middle ground of some sort because these outcomes happen. That a parliamentarian isn't allowed to ask that question, which is fine. The question then becomes, as an ANC member, you're allowed to ask that question as well. And I think that's the struggle. Yeah. And you're going to have all that infighting around that confidence, plus now dealing with all these other parties. And that's why I fear having, all the way back, a government of national unity for the sake of doing it.
Yeah.
Because you bring too many different peoples who have antagonism who can shut down that confidence.
Completely.
Very quickly.
You decide overnight that,
no, we're not with you anymore.
We're getting rid of this guy.
Vis-a-vis one partner, whether it's the DA who you know would be upset about backing you, or the EFF, or whatever other mechanism, where it's one or two people where you then say, what's your red line?
Tricky.
Not what are these multiple red lines.
There are too many.
What is your one red line that will ensure that if you do this against us, we will have no complaints.
Yeah.
And we make that public, but that's a whole other conversation.
There's a continuing narrative that says all these conversations must be public.
Yeah.
Because you didn't put yourself in those positions. We did. And why is it that these conversations are happening without us? South Africa is saying, if we're able to put courts, and I use the phrase South Africa very loosely because I don't agree in the concept of South Africa as a whole. Agrees on one thing. But there's a notion that's growing that says, we are the ones that said, go there and represent us. Right now, you are discussing a power sharing solution. Surely, if we're able to put Senzo Mayua's court case on TV, we can put this on TV, and all of us here who are the dumb cops in the room, or who are saying,
who's serious about these discussions,
exactly, and with what tone and energy and all of that, and I don't see anything particularly wrong with that, but it doesn't look like it's something that'll ever happen.
No, I don't think it will happen. Also, we must accept the political system that we've chosen then, because PR, I can hop on this so many times. The closed-list PR system is not about holding someone accountable. It's about giving representation to a party to represent you. The accountability almost stops after your vote. The minute you give that power over, the ability to hold them accountable must only happen within the structures of parliament. So if the structures of parliament then shut up shop and say, we'll discuss this amongst ourselves. Right? It is what it is. This is the mandate you gave us. Right? Vis-a-vis if you had a constituency system where you say, before you go to that meeting, come back to your constituency.
And explain.
And explain to us. Explain and listen to what we would want as well, what your community is saying in one way or another, and then go back to your party and discuss this. Our views.
We now, the people of Kronstadt, have given you this mandate.
This mandate. Go back to your party, send that. If it fails, you must come back and explain to us why our views never emerged in that meeting or why they did emerge. And if we are happy that they didn't emerge and you gave it your best, sharp, we keep it moving. But if we're unhappy, then we remember this and you say the next election we won't vote for you in particular. Because clearly you can't fight.
Because you're the wrong guy.
You're the wrong guy for us. That's why it's almost like a shop steward in the union in particular. You can recall a shop steward and say, no, you're not doing your job, essentially. The transparency that we're really looking for me, isn't about whether we can hear the conversations and listen to what people are saying. Because I think if we do that, you're going to get into like the political theater and grandstanding and, it just confuses things.
Becomes a mess.
Yeah. And we've seen it as well. Actually, let me not go too far in the past because then we go back to like Codesa days. But you don't want to get into the grandstanding. The transparency you want to see is that final agreement, both the long version and the high level principle, so that you don't bury things in a long version that we must now, like the state capture report, I always get so frustrated by it. It's like 6 volumes, thousands of pages.
There should be a summarized version.
And I'm like, even the summarized version is long as well. I'm like, give me the key points of like, who are we supposed to go after? So that an ordinary citizen, if that name pops up, it's automatic. It's automatic. So that person,
they're connecting them to...
That person has no business being in any sort of position. We mustn't be surprised. Like someone this week was surprised that Zizu Goto was mentioned in the state. I said, no, what do you mean? He was there.
He gets a paragraph in the middle of
in the whole...
in a big document.
But we can only be surprised by that because people, it's just hard. Even journalists themselves, it's a hard document to get through. But the agreement we need is, what is the substantial issues? These are the 3 things I'm looking for. It would be, what are the core legislative issues that you agree upon that you will push, either for the other person, right, or on behalf of the coalition, right? So the DA could come out and say, we really want to push an amendment to the IPED Act from last year or early this year, so the Independent Police Investigate Directorate, right, to make it actually independent, so that it doesn't sit in the minister's office or underneath like the minister's purview. We as the DA want to bring that up. This is the issue. It's on our legislative agenda. You're voting with us, and the ANC says, you know what, sharp, we're voting with you. That type of agreement, right, of long term, where I'm like, sharp. And then I want to know what are the red line things of, these are the issues, we'll just go back to Parliament. We'll put this, you do not have to support us. We'll go find, as the DA or the EFF, we'll go find the 30% or the 40% that we need. We don't need to rely on your vote. So you then know issues we know is on our legislative agenda, and the general issues we know is not there. What do you do for new issues that rock up? That no one can foresee.
Phala Phala took us all by surprise.
Exactly, right? What do you do in that situation? If we agree, we then go back to one of these 2 models. If we disagree, fundamentally, what is our dispute mechanism in that situation? Those are the 3 things I would want to see, right, from that. And then a simplified version that is then given to the public, so that when something bad happens, the public, media, academics can all go back and say, which one of these issues became the problem and who is at fault for this coalition breaking up? So that people don't break the coalition for the sake of breaking it for political expediency.
True. Which is what we've seen
in
municipalities.
Exactly
where
that.
It's just
really quick. There's no before you can figure out why the one person was removed, the
There's a
next
new
person
one.
has now also been removed as well. But you're still wondering, but
the one before.
Yeah, but you're still investigating the one before. And it becomes a mess, which is why we need that transparency at a national level, in particular from the parties.
There's something that kept on cropping up once the results were out, or it was clear where we were heading in that 2 days or so, about legislating coalition, where the rules are governed elsewhere of the setup. The rules are said, if you get the majority, presidency is yours, it's automatic.
Yeah.
If you get presidency and so many ministerial positions and so forth and so forth. Are we at that stage?
So, one of my favorite MPs is the current chief whip, or the technically old chief whip of the DA, Sivire Gwarube. Love her to bits. 2 years ago, she put up a private member's bill, essentially saying, we need to sort this out. We need to create some sort of framework. I'm not asking for rafts of legislation, but some sort of framework that creates the rules of engagement, at least, right? So that when we are engaging, there's certain rules that we're participating in. Because when we're in the middle of the fight and you're throwing punches, you can't be negotiating what are the rules of what punches you can throw and what punches you can't.
There's no time. Stop.
Exactly.
Let me check what's going on.
Exactly that, right? And again, ANC, unfair. I always go back, unfair question. Like the ANC be like, yeah, but to do that is us then thinking that we're going to lose. Like that doesn't make sense. We're not discussing this.
Why do I come to a party where I know I don't have to be?
But parallel, the ANC was doing this already. So for the last year and a half, the deputy minister in particular has really been talking about creating a framework for coalitions.
That's true.
It was primarily for a local government level.
Paul Mashatile has
been like that face to be like, this is what I want to do. This is the work that I want to do. Shane Parkstyle doesn't get away from this as well, but as deputy minister, if I remember correctly, he's actually been in the works of creating this framework. But everyone dragged their feet.
Oh no.
That's the problem that we had as well. That it wasn't as if the political parties weren't aware that there was a need for some sort of framework. We know this 2 years ago, everyone was made aware of this. Over the last 2 years, there's been discussions about this. And I don't just put the blame on the ANC for this. What do they call it? The multi-party charter. Talk for 8-9 months.
Then they were moonshot.
Then they were moonshot, and then they became multi-party charter. And then they had this one line, which is, but then after the results come out, then every man for themselves.
For himself, yes.
And you think to yourself, well, then what was the purpose of this? Because if you had that in place, going into this election, the ANC is then negotiating with one grouping.
As a collective.
Not with multiple organizations with multiple different interests, right? Those are essentially, you're changing the rules of engagement as you go along, yourselves as opposition. So you're not making the job easier, but there is no legislative framework. So
is it necessary?
I think it is. So another study by the Public Affairs Research Institute, PARI, love them. So they did a study about institutional arrangements in local government through coalitions, right? So they show how local government looks from the executive to the legislature, right? And it was quite dominated, it was quite predictable. What you would expect in a coalition at a local level is that the sharing of positions is done according to like voter share, generally speaking, right? Or it follows some sort of thematic focus where certain people have control over finances, other people have control of like service delivery of like bread and butter things, right? And you control it that way. What they found out was that this was just a mixed match of everything and anything. And the entire institutional arrangements of local government were thrown upside down, backwards, forwards. And there was no coherent idea about who is responsible for what.
Oh, no.
Right?
That's the worst case scenario.
It's the worst situation. Yeah. And within that chaos, what they found was that the primary focus of the parties, at least to parry, is positions and patronage. Those are the two things. It wasn't about who is best in what particular job, who is great at this, It wasn't even about ideologically. Along my manifesto, I really talked about this particular issue. So really give me push for that.
Yes.
That people would swap. The only most consistent one, because I always love being fair, is like the EFF. EFF has always been kind of consistent about like outsourcing. Of like whether we do it or you do it, it must happen.
Yes, somebody needs to do it.
Someone must do it,
Yeah.
right? So there's a lot of, some parties can be consistent, but at a local government level, we just see the arrangement completely thrown out.
Oh.
National government could be different. It's not to say because the stakes are higher, but also the demarcation between the executive and the legislature is a lot clearer, right? It's a lot more. So, fun fact, when Cyril Ramaphosa, if he goes, let me not assume anything, but if he was to be sworn in, technically he walks in as a member of parliament, and as soon as he becomes president,
he relinquishes.
He relinquishes.
Yes. Yeah.
But his cabinet members stay members of parliament, technically speaking, all of them. And then he can only find 2 other people outside of parliament to become part of his cabinet, right? So there's this clear demarcation of power, like very clear demarcation. So you could have all these machinations. So back to the permutations.
Let's go in another one.
Which one?
I know it's an unlikely one. ANC MK coalition. It's an obvious one. You spoke about it before. It's an obvious one.
It's a personality issue.
It's a personality problem.
Yeah.
It's 2 brothers that are fighting over the father's taxi business, and now you're saying, "Come together, man. You can do this."
Shame people. My colleagues will say, no, it's more than that. So it's personality. I'll add 2 other things to it. So one is personality. One is, I know from like the ANC's perspective, from like the kind of renewal perspective, it would be, no, but these are the bad apples.
That's like, been the narrative.
Yeah, like we worked hard to get them out. If we bring them back in, we're moving backwards as an organization. Like that makes absolutely no sense. And you bring back all the bad behaviors. You bring back all the political protection that the current bad apples still inside your party are craving for as well. When Zuma comes back, he brings political protection for everyone else as well. So that rationale is a very, very important one. And the third one is like, it's just national security. It is, no one is unaware about the July unrest.
No, we all remember.
Right?
Yes.
So there is this particular notion of the types of tactics, the types of language, the individuals who are publicly kind of instigating, right, are now being brought into the ANC. And the last one, which I love, because the ANC is a very simple organization. There's nothing fundamentally
they're not complicated. Yes.
It's called outside the ANC for a reason. You can't come back and become a leader of the party. That doesn't happen. If you leave the party, then you've left.
But we find ourselves with different dynamics.
It'd be interesting. This is the seismic shift.
This has never happened.
So I think for those reasons, they probably won't. But if they did come together, which in terms of like policy, the ANC will say, we don't believe in, I'm like, your policies are the same. Your policies are only different on paper. But what your branches talk about, same thing.
Everything is the same.
Everything is the same.
Including the name.
Yeah, like everything is the same here. The one major difference would be like the parliamentary thing. But
and the constitution. They say talking about getting rid of the constitution.
Yeah, that would be like, and obviously big sticking point. I'm not underplaying. Big sticking point, that one. But outside of that, like if you went to an ANC branch meeting, there's a branch I really like in Tembisa in particular. If you were to bring up that conversation of nationalization of Reserve Bank, this would not be a new conversation you're bringing into the room. This would be something that people have talked about for a while. This is a policy that came from ANC structures many years ago about before COVID, why are we doing inflation targeting? Like, what are we doing as a country? Like, who are we trying to appease? That conversation is a very normal. It's an old one. Like, there's nothing new. It's just about what policies are on paper. That's the only difference. If they were to come together, I don't know if MK would want to be in parliament like chairperson roles.
Okay.
Right? And this is like the difference between like an MK and a DA, for instance. I think they would want particular committees that allow them to protect themselves, but allow them to agitate for this kind of constitutional change. But I think they would desperately say, you can keep all the important national committees. That's fine. But you have to give us KZN.
Full on.
Full on.
It's all ours.
We're not debate. You have to give us KZN. Whatever way we do this, your votes must come to give us that strong majority here so that MK doesn't die as a party. Right? That we can show that we can govern immediately. This is the biggest advantage that MK has vis-a-vis other parties since the DA in the mid-2000s
with the Western Cape.
With the Western Cape of coming in and essentially and saying, I can run a province. Let me do this thing.
Yeah.
So I imagine that'll be on the table. I imagine MK will go to the EFF
and say, we can do this together.
Let's do this together. Well, really, honestly, we're friends here.
It's a short trip.
Yeah.
And I remember when it was your birthday, I gave you a call.
Yeah. Like we're not strangers with each other.
We fought in the past.
And we can get that 67, which is such a tempting number. That 67 is a very tempting number, which brings back this democratic centralism back into conversation. But I think that would work without them necessarily taking portfolio positions. Which is different from the EFF and the DA, where the EFF would say we would want cabinet positions.
They've already made it clear.
Right. We want cabinet positions. We won't sell our soul for this, and I love the EFF for that. Like we don't need this. Like we were also punched in the face. I mean, I said it. I think they're the second biggest losers in this election.
I don't think they'll openly admit it.
No, I mean it was a bad
performance.
Bad performance.
Yeah.
Right. Based off like the expectation, their growth trajectory at that point, and the scale of the EFF coming up, which is individuals with same demographics, same kind of ideological standpoint, that you couldn't steal those voters from the ANC. Or to steal is rough. Take those voters from the ANC.
They've done their damage to the ANC.
Yeah, 100%.
In Julius Malema's words, we are eating this thing one bite at a time.
One bite. It's just that one person ordered the entire menu and took it all at once and asked for seconds on top of that.
That's what happened.
So they would go for cabinets, whereas it's very different for the DA.
With the DA.
With the DA, it is...
Give us legislature.
Give us legislature. Now, it's such a simple argument to say give us legislature, because why would the ANC also do that? Why would I give you all the mechanisms to then harass me?
Exactly. Like you're going to harass me.
You're going to harass me every single day. You're going to be calling my minutes. I can imagine the president, whoever it is, thinking to themselves, why can I not have a cabinet? Why is everyone in my cabinet in Cape Town?
Answering to portfolio committees.
We're supposed to be here in the union buildings. Now you're in portfolio committees and this. So you can't. So it would be... What are the key things? Well, Scopa, number one.
Of course.
Traditionally, I know people are like debating Scopa, but Scopa has traditionally always been given to an opposition.
Even now?
Yeah.
It was IFP. Yes.
Well, IFP's had it for like the last while now. IFP's been like the trusted hands of like
Scopa. Yes.
We'll neuter Scopa enough, but also have a chair who doesn't get too excited. I imagine DA would want Scopa back.
Of course.
Because they've never been given Scopa before. They would want Scopa. They would most likely want intelligence. They would most likely want the committee around SOEs. I imagine that would be the case.
Of course.
Public enterprises. The question then becomes, how do you split up the roles of the speakers of House? If I remember, it's like 1 and 3 deputy speakers or something like that.
Who do you give?
Who do you give?
Yes. And will they work well together?
Exactly that. Because you can't have a speaker on an island.
No.
Right? So you can't have the DA get speaker, but then all the deputies
are from elsewhere.
Like it doesn't make sense. So the question then becomes to the ANC is, I can't give you all these other things and give you speaker.
There's been a notion, I don't know how crazy this is, that speaker mustn't come from political parties.
So yes and no. It depends on like how you go about it. So let's take like the UK, for instance. And this again is about like culture, political culture grown over decades upon decades. Hundreds of years, whereas we're babies. We're like 30 years in the making. There it is. The person comes from a party, but when they become speaker, they are no longer part of the party.
Is that even possible?
Right? In our context now, I find it hard. I find it hard to see based off the political culture that we have. But if you had been doing this for 100 years, it is such a privileged position. It is seen as so honorable to be able to remove yourself from your party, to be able to say that you've given me this responsibility to be your check and balance.
everyone.
For everyone. Equally. Right? I don't think we have that culture in the country. I also don't necessarily agree with it as well.
Tell me.
If your party wins a majority, you must take control of the legislative agenda.
You must be the one that
you
controls
must be the one who
the
controls
formulation of
what happens.
Of laws and
you don't need to have a neutral referee there. I didn't vote for a referee. You voted for me to lead the country. Like, why are we now having a referee who's tempering my ability to deliver on my mandate? So I think there's pros and cons.
But it also goes back to the assumption that we're giving this power to someone whom we think they'll look after all of us. It goes back to that assumption. Yeah.
I mean, we have had interesting speakers over the last kind of 20 years now. The speaker job is a hard job.
Jeez.
It's not made for everyone, especially here. I always say that, for those who go to so I grew up in the ANC. I know how to collapse a meeting.
Jeez.
I've seen how meetings collapsed. I remember my kind of political mentor at the time. There's an art form to this.
Jeez.
And I remember being in university, and they were like, I was at the University of Cape Town, and they said, you must come join the debating thing. We can debate this. I said, the way you debate doesn't match up the way politics is debated in this country. And I remember writing a book chapter on the EFF's politics, or what I called at the time kind of must-fall politics. And I said it was a resurgence of the types of political discourse that happens in ANC branches into parliament. When people say parliament feels like European and foreign, that it's structured, this is what people are talking about. That the culture of debate doesn't match up with what parliament does. And all the EFF did was bring that form of interrogation and political discourse and political debate into a space that is trying to mimic a different type of political culture, or trying to impose one. Whether it's European or whatnot, but a political culture being imposed on a form of political culture that already exists. This thing of this meeting won't continue because you are out of order. And the out of order isn't a notable issue, right? Parliament right now is supposed to look at points of order as like, this is a notable issue, we'll return to this later. Within a branch meeting, that point of order means this meeting can't continue
because of this thing.
Until this thing, because any decisions we make from here on out would then be invalid.
And EFF brought that
energy
that
back in.
That branch culture.
Brought that branch culture into the halls of parliament. I love them for it, right? It's that true representation of like, what are the different kind of political cultures of the country from, again, that kind of the ANC's dominant kind of culture and influence on the country. So for me, Speaker of the House needs to be that person who fully understands that culture as well. Which is why we've seen like a few changes there in a manner that I thought the ANC did in a smart way. But you need someone who's aware and knows how to manage that without losing the decorum of the National Assembly at the same time. To be able to balance these types of voices, these types of clashing cultures, exactly what our democracy was trying to do. We're all diverse. This is what happens when you put diverse people into one room.
Something you said, time flies. It is.
Yeah.
It's so much time has flown. I'll ask quick questions with quick answers.
Yes.
ANC veteran Snooki Zigala says they didn't see the MK coming. Is that a true reflection of reality?
I was making this joke of like there are scaries in the ANC.
The pimpis, so to speak.
Yeah, it's impossible. It means, I made a comment about this, it means that the leadership of the ANC as a whole, I hate how people always blame Cyril Ramaphosa for like all the ANC's ills. That whole NEC can't come out and say we never saw MK coming. That's an indictment on that entire leadership that was elected in Nasrec. And if you do accept that argument that we never saw it coming, then ANC branches and regions must go back and say, are you guys then the right people to be leading us?
You're not.
Because how can we be ambushed like this? Rather say, no, we saw it coming and it is what it is. We lost them.
We couldn't control it.
They were the bad apples. Rather use that language, but we didn't see it coming at all. And obviously, Sunigi is not part of the NEC, if I'm not mistaken. I don't remember seeing his name there. But it does pose that question about how strong is the leadership of the party? Have all these factional party battles watered down the ability for them to be critically reflective about the state of the party and how much the country supports them, or did they get kind of drunk off their own Kool-Aid?
They speak of we lost because, listen to the phrase, we lost because of MK. That's the line. And for me, that line tends to sound like it's watered down. Because South African politicians, rather South Africans went into this election already saying, I'm not sure who to vote for. That was the common narrative. And some would say, I know who not to vote for.
Yeah.
But I don't know who to vote for.
Yes.
And I think, in all fairness, to the statement that says we lost because of MK, South Africans were already uncertain and unsettled before.
Yeah.
It's just MK may have given them an alternative solution to their indecision. Is that statement correct? Because some also speak of and they talk about where we started with this conversation. I switch on my lights, there are no lights.
Yeah.
And. That's why I asked us to connect.
Who's
to blame?
Who to blame?
Exactly.
So I mean, I actually agree with that argument.
That says we lost because of MK.
We lost because of MK.
Okay.
Because of everything else that happened around this election. So the biggest one, and again, we need to dig into this, low voter turnout
is an issue.
Killed all the opposition parties. Right? Low voter turnout traditionally always suits the ruling party or party in power. It's guaranteed, because you're not adding new voices into the political spectrum. You're only relying on people who are already going to vote in a particular way. Going into this election, this is why I didn't like polls in our country. Polls in our country, like they got it right, but I was telling someone that but you stumbled into the correct answer. Your calculations didn't predict this. You just stumbled by mistake into this answer. A lot of the polls will talk about the ANC was going to lose, 100%. But a lot of the polls didn't predict MK's rise. But most importantly, they never told the public about the amount of undecided voters in the country. Right? I think it was a third of the country was just sitting there and being like, we have no idea who we're going to vote for.
I did a show like that. I said, are you voting or not? Give me two possible answers, but give me the third one.
Yeah.
That says, I am not sure. I'll decide on the day.
Yeah.
That gives you another batch of people.
100%. And you have no idea how to calculate them, which is why I didn't like polls. But going back to the ANC in particular, everyone else stayed the same or was worse of the established parties. Outside of IFP grew just a little bit.
Yeah.
DA went up by a percentage, but dropped by 100,000 votes. They essentially stayed the same.
Yeah.
There's nothing fundamentally different about the DA's voter base. And all they did was they got back the VF voters
that they had lost. And
I need to go see the electoral map to see. I always look at Linden.
Where did they?
Linden in Joburg is a flip-flop province.
You are in
am I in
Linden now?
It is a flip-flop little area for the VF and DA. They're forever fighting here.
Yeah.
DA hasn't fundamentally shifted in any particular way. EFF has gotten worse. They also didn't grow, they decreased.
Maybe I should move my vote. My vote is still in Pretoria, but anyway.
VF Plus decreased by a couple 10,000 votes or something. IFP did increase just a little bit, but that was we are fighting back this tsunami that is MK. So the question then becomes, well, if no one else grew, and PA had their
you can't ignore
moment.
them. Small,
they had their moment. But I'm thinking about in this kind of big picture. I go back, remember when I was saying at the beginning about the ANC losing 2029, that would be 4%, maybe 5%. And my numbers had them at 49 to 52, within that band. If you take those votes from MK and you just add them back to the ANC, they get right back onto that schedule.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes, these votes were then taken. No one else grew. It would be a different conversation if the DA grew, EFF grew.
Okay,
then the whole country, even
was
with
thinking
the same way. Then you look at the electoral map and I say, MK really did not get votes anywhere else in the country except Western KZN, Central KZN, Southern Mpumalanga, and then like this one little area in particular in Gauteng, on the east of Gauteng. So this little band of KZN in particular. All their other votes is like 2,000 votes in the Western Cape type of thing. When you look at the old map, that was all ANC.
Those areas.
Yeah. It was all ANC. So you've literally, what we would call, flipped these votes your way. And the ANC will look at the map and say, no other opposition flipped our votes.
These are the guys.
These are the guys. These are my sin. Everyone else, you might have flipped one or two, but you're not my concern.
So then it answers also the question that they didn't lose based on, and I'll use a simple phrase, service delivery issues, and. Am I correct?
In my mind,
that?
If it was the case, it was service delivery issues, what you would expect is a high voter turnout.
Yes, right. Because South Africans are
so angry about this. You would expect high voter turnout. You would then expect traditional bases across the board, because it's not like service delivery is unique to a particular area.
All South
as
Africans.
If only KZN dealt with that. You would expect a bigger flip across the board. We did see it. So we see it in Gauteng, but that's been a general trend. We've seen it in, obviously, Western Cape, Northern Cape, where they didn't get the majority. But the other bases, they're fine. Like Limpopo, they're fine. Eastern Cape, they're fine.
It probably grew in Limpopo.
Yeah, Limpopo, 70% clear. We're fine.
Yeah.
Right? You would have expected a larger flip or huge, and this is the indication where they lost people, that people just didn't vote. That low voter turnout across the provinces was, we are punished, that old adage that we started hearing in 2016, we are punishing the ANC by not voting for them. Yeah. We're not punishing them by voting for someone else.
It still carries on.
It still holds.
Yeah.
Because the ANC's general patterns, based on the numbers that I've seen, haven't fundamentally shifted outside of that one particular area, and Gauteng in particular.
Sure. Let's because I'm trying to manage time. Why does the ANC hold on to this notion of a government of national unity, deliberately connecting it to the history of government of national unity? The history of government of national unity in South Africa is a CODESA 1994 thing.
Yeah.
That presented what it presented. There are some people, EFF is clear that thing was absolute nonsense. It didn't bring South Africa where South Africans, which is the majority of South Africans, wanted this country to be.
Yeah.
That's one argument that's used. And I like the phrase that says, we are not Mandelas. It's a different era, different time. We don't see the world that way. However, some people fail to remember that government of national unity didn't last an entire term.
Yeah.
It lasted 2 years.
2 years.
And it was gone.
Yeah.
30th of June, de Klerk gave Mandela a call.
He said, I'm done.
And said, I'm done with this thing. I don't want it anymore. I don't see why it benefits me.
Yeah.
Why is it that you feel, and you in some way you've answered this, that it's a play, that working it out. Why do you feel that ANC is holding on to it and not just calling Julius and PA and say, let's form a government and move on?
Yeah. I mean, just one thing on that other government of national unity. Technically, they also had 3 years to negotiate what their coalition agreement would be.
That's true.
Right? And
it took 3 years.
It took them 3 years.
15 days.
We have 15 days. And during those 3 years, it collapsed.
Even after?
Even after it collapsed. So, people forget that it's almost this assumption like we just created the government of national unity and everyone was on the same page. As if we didn't have, what was that Afrikaans grouping that came and stormed?
Oh, yeah.
What's their name?
They stormed the...
Yeah, with guns and everything and said, no, we're shutting this down.
Is it the AWB? It is the
AWB.
Yes,
I think it was I'm glad they've disappeared from our lexicon.
With horses and all sorts of things. Yes.
Right, there was chaos. It didn't just happen.
Yeah.
But today, it is that argument that I gave, that I think it was a clever ploy of putting the ball in someone else's court. I think it also represents, and this is now me kind of speculating. I've been avoiding speculating.
I know, but we are in the era of the time of speculation. What else do we have?
So I think it is representative of kind of the president's, and I'll put this on the president in particular, indecisiveness. Right, that he's president, he's kind of been plagued by a lack of being decisive about what you're doing, about trying to play 3D chess when all of us are fine with 2D, with like not 4D chess, but all of us are fine with 3D chess. Like we're fine with the chessboard as it is. You're overcomplicating things. And that lack of decisiveness in being seen as a bad guy to someone.
Whoever it is.
Whoever it is.
So you want to be the good guy to everyone.
You want to be the good guy to everyone, right? Which is fine as like a president of the country, but it's awful as a president of a party that particularly looks at your particular interests. You're not looking at all of society's. And the ANC is not looking at every single person's interests. They're looking about who believes in our ideological position around the National Democratic Revolution. If you're with us, you're with us. If you're against us, you're against us. We'll see you at the polls.
Let's go.
Let's go. Yeah. We're pushing on with our life. We're not negotiating with people we don't need to negotiate with. And it's that lack of decisiveness of the ANC in particular in this, which is troubling. And I don't know why that's the case. And I think the other one is, there is one eye on, I keep bringing this up, only because it was brought to my attention, about KZN, that whatever you do, you need to include KZN in this conversation. Even if IFP might disagree with someone else. But if we want to control, and I don't mean like win back KZN, but just control rising tensions in KZN, with the conversations about this vote was rigged, right? There was massive amounts of fraud, the accusations against the IEC's integrity, which IEC we can have a whole conversation about, right? That there is a need to essentially say, how do we temper down this energy?
Yeah. Do you feel the energy is growing?
I think South Africans are allowing it. No, South Africans love movies, man. There's currently a show that's playing, which is coalition negotiations. This conversation about this thing was stolen, we'll see on Friday. But we take one show at a time. I don't think it has disappeared. I'm a firm, I'm an opponent of Twitter. Twitter will confuse people in many different respects. But I think there's a tangible concern with the IEC. Can I tell you why?
Yeah.
And I've said this to the IEC as well. So my moonlighting job was a part of another organization called Defend Our Democracy. And we did like an election observation campaign.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, yeah.
So the IEC for the last 8 years now, there's been a survey from Afrobarometer alongside the Institute of Justice and Reconciliation that has shown for the last 10 years a decreasing amount of trust in the IEC across all South African demographics, right? That I think hit like 60% of South Africans have questions about the IEC. This has been growing. This is not something that is like a surprise to the IEC. So when questions are posed about the integrity of the IEC, it is easy to spark that flame. I think we were talking about this before. It is easy to spark that flame. So for me, it's not about whether MK is shouting about this. What I'm hearing is that citizens in general are asking questions about
before even MK existed.
Before MK even existed, about because we had issues in the last local elections. I remember the first time I heard about issues in 2019 as well. Fun fact, Farrell Hafji wrote an article about Russia interfering with our elections in 2019 in favor of the ANC. But we never talked about that story, which is a fascinating...
disappeared.
It just disappeared. I remember that so well. But when you have this growing tension or lack of trust with this institution, it will always be natural that people will then ask questions about the nature of the institution. I think that is a valid concern, that you need a government of national unity, if this is the ANC, so back to that original question, to essentially say, how do we temper these concerns and create some sort of unifying thing so that even if your party is angry about this, we're here together. Essentially. But if you only do that of short-term rationale, this will come back and bite you later on.
And I think that's what, whether you agree with the former President Jacob Zuma's politics or not, that's what he's saying. He's saying, the people have nothing else to do in this case. They have no other way of showing you that they are unhappy.
Yeah.
And if you ignore us, or ignore this, actually, it's not saying us, if you ignore this thing, you're going to do it at your own peril. It might come back to bite you. And that's essentially what he's saying. He's saying, what else do you want South Africans to do
I mean,
when they feel this thing is not, they're not happy with it?
I mean, I remember watching the press conference. I was agreeing with some of my colleagues who were like, really like, no, it's not right. And I was like, yeah, but what is the VASH? Like, what?
You know what? And I'll say this, and I'll say it now in this recording. I was booked to DJ at that event. The closing.
I know. I think I know where this is going.
I was booked. I DJed the opening, and I was booked to DJ at the closing. It was scheduled in my diary.
Yeah.
When is the closing?
Yeah.
I want you to note this. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. Flip. Tandi Somazo, I performed. It was scheduled. And the stage was scheduled to arrive on a particular day. The sound guys were scheduled to arrive on a particular day. I just happen to have the platform that tells you about it.
Yes.
So that means the end of the gig was scheduled.
Yes.
Trust me, they didn't declare the announcement of the results because of me.
You never know.
Because they didn't want to disrupt my schedule.
Yeah.
And say, oh, Dave, sorry. The MK is complaining. We're going to move the election by a few days. So do you mind coming on that date? It wasn't scheduled. Like it essentially what I'm really saying is it was planned to be from this day to this day.
Yeah.
And we pack. The circus is over. We put stuff in the truck
and we carry on.
Go home.
It is the most frustrating thing. Now, unless I was given a really good counter, unless there was really good information about not announcing is a national security risk.
Okay.
Because you don't want vacuums, right? So the longer a vacuum exists in all elections that have these types of vacuums of uncertainty, and you allow that oxygen, bad things happen. So there is an incentive to call an election as quickly as possible.
You have 7 days.
But then you've got 7 days. And if people are lodging these complaints, your rationale for why we want to close this up in 4 days must be a solid one. And I didn't like the rationale. I didn't like it. One of them was because, people have been committed to hearing the results. I said, who cares?
It's an
irrelevant thing. One was like, I think the markets we need to think about. I said, who cares about that? This is your democratic outcome. If you gave us that in a vacuum, bad things happen, then I'll say, no, sharp, we're on the same page. So that rationale is not great. But then I go back to MK, where I say, but you must also be serious about this. Show us this evidence then.
Okay. If indeed you have
If it's so dramatic that it really has a material impact on the state of elections, then you can't keep this in your back pocket. They'll say, no, we want to go through the case, we want to go through the courts. I say, then sharp. But then don't shout about this process. The courts will follow due process.
True. If it's an urgent matter,
if it is an urgent matter, it will be treated as such.
Yeah.
The Constitutional Court will say, yeah, no, this, based off what we're seeing, this is a huge thing. Let's slow things down. But you can't have it both ways. You just can't.
Yeah.
And I think MK is trying to have it both ways, of essentially being able to play this out, but also going through the courts in a slow, deliberate manner. Can I tell you what my theory is about this? My theory is the MK is deliberate. I don't think the MK has hard evidence. I think they know this. I think it's fine. They're going to go to the electoral court. They're going to be found at the electoral court that everything is fine. I mean, this is a ridiculous case. They're going to appeal it to the Constitutional Court. And I think this will be MK's strategy for the next 5 years.
It's a typical
Zuma. Yeah, it's the Stalingrad thing.
This is what he does.
And it is all about chipping away, because I don't think MK doesn't care about Parliament, in my mind. MK cares about the Constitutional Court. It is, we need to chip the trust that people have in the Constitutional Court at any opportunity.
Wow. Yeah.
That we'll bring this case to the Constitutional Court and it will be struck down at the Constitutional Court.
And already
we'll come back and we say, you see what happened?
We told you.
Even the Court agrees in a rigged vote. This is why we want to go parliamentary supremacy.
Wow.
And I believe they will do this over and over and over again as a way of showing that the Constitution doesn't represent people. It doesn't represent the will of the country
people.
Itself. And I think it's a bloody good strategy. If they're doing that, it is a bloody good strategy.
They'll probably listen to this and say, we should do that.
Because everyone then falls into their hands.
Yeah.
Right? And why I go back to the IEC It was a firm statement of, if we believe in this constitution, then we must believe in it.
Yes.
We must believe in
Yeah,
it.
completely.
So we are ending this election. We've looked at these things. We'll deal with these complaints. If you disagree, here's the channels through the constitution.
We're good.
I am not going to play politics as the IEC.
Mhm.
The IEC is not playing politics in this regard. We're not listening to the president. We're not listening to MK. We are acting as a Chapter 9 independent institution, and we've made a choice and we're sticking with it.
Jeez.
So even though I agree, why rush it?
Mm.
I can also look at the IEC and be like, yo, you saved us as well.
So in some way, what is very simply answered, do you feel there's merit in what MK is doing?
Without seeing the evidence, it's impossible to know.
Yes.
So like we see like Twitter videos of like, these numbers. I was like, I can't use this as like, and also that happens in every single election. So anyone who's been an observer would know this happens as well. And then the IEC reconciles the numbers and they rectify them. This is not like, there's no conspiracy here. I got annoyed with one of these parties.
There's been lots, Rasa and Ara.
Yeah, I think it was R.A.
Ara.
Yes. I got really annoyed with them. I was like, you are too small of a party to be making so much noise in our lives.
There's 100. That's missing.
Yeah.
It was Ara.
Like,
they even staged a protest the following day in the morning.
And I was just like, all of this is inflammatory for no particular reason outside of disrupting the trust that people already, the trust that people have in elections.
Yeah.
Right? So for me, if these cases had merit, because I'm not looking at like MK, I'm just looking at what people do across the world.
Mm-hmm.
If you're serious about this, you then bring out all that evidence.
Yeah.
And you say, here's all the tampering, here's where we are, and then the coup d'etat can start from there. Because if you want to have a coup d'etat, you don't want the West coming down on you too hard. You must make them doubt just a little bit to say, no, but there's merit here.
Yeah.
But to see nothing, to use this kind of video evidence that we're seeing for like particular municipalities, we're not seeing large-scale systemic fraud from the IEC.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people need to keep that kind of macro viewpoint. The counter-argument is, but every vote counts. I say 100% valid.
Every single one.
Every single
Somebody
vote
had to wake
counts,
up, stand in a queue, and
100%.
Yes.
But when with your vote, did you make that complaint to the IEC as well? Did you go double check? Did you go double check that, you know, if you voted for an obscure party, that they were represented, because you can go see it? Were you, and it's not to say that there's a deeper responsibility that you have, but it's to also acknowledge that every vote counts, but your particular vote doesn't matter more than the democratic stability of the country.
Jeez. Has the ANC used its majority well?
No, they could have done so much more. You know, when you think about like what could have been, and it could have gone in two ways. Either they really could have been tyrants. Yeah. You know, the ANC, if they really wanted to, they could have been tyrants. When they hit that 69.7% during Mbeki's, when Mbeki was on fire at that point, he was running first time as the leader, went into 2004, 69.7%. I think some number like that. You could have done whatever you wanted to do.
You could have spun this country into chaos or into something amazing.
I don't think they used their majority and subsequent majorities as effectively as they could have. I think there was a lot of individuals inside before the Mbeki time who were like holding back on large scale kind of change. I think they got distracted by their own internal fights. I think they got distracted by the systemic level of corruption. There used to be this phrase, I'm exposing stories now. There used to be this phrase of like, no, you can steal anywhere else, but you can't steal from Treasury and you can't steal from SARS.
Ooh.
Everything else
is open game.
But it was always like a joke of like, no, we can joke about this. These are the two things that can never be touched. Zuma changed that playbook. Completely. He went after SARS, took SARS. Tried going after National Treasury, failed in his regard to the National Treasury.
That's the weekend. The weekend of the minister, Van Rooyen.
Des Van Rooyen. He's also parachuted himself back into relevance recently.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
He's back?
He came through, it's a whole other story, through the ANC in Gauteng, got kicked out there. I think he went back to MK. He's in MK now. Anyway, ANC could have done a lot more, a whole much more. but they also didn't do fundamentally bad things in this country as well.
That they could have done.
But they could have done.
Yeah.
So do I think they misused their majority? Yes, 100%.
Absolutely.
Because they both didn't do amazing things and they also didn't utilize the majority for ill will. Why that's the case? Infighting, a lack of coherence, and I think a decapacitating of the state to be able to do things. So like land, like whenever I think about land, it really pains my heart of like, you can have someone who's still like on voting day, there was a community in the Eastern Cape that said, no, we've had a land claim since 1998 that hasn't been resolved.
We're not voting.
We're not voting.
Yeah.
That can't happen. You can't have a community that is saying in the last 26 years, when we lodged this complaint, nothing has come out of this.
Jeez.
That can't be right.
That is the misuse of the majority.
Exactly. That can't be right. That's an incapacitating of the state that is unforgivable in so many ways. So yeah, I think they could have done a lot more, but now we'll never know. Because
is it a little too late for the ANC?
I think it's the best thing that could have happened to the ANC. For me, I had been shouting this from the rafters of like, this is 2029 for me.
You saw it.
It came early,
yes.
But I'm really, really excited because it forces the ANC to make a choice. Are we serious about renewal or are we not?
Yeah.
Because right now we don't have a majority to protect the nonsense in the party. And if you're doing nonsense in the party, we can't even protect you. We can't protect you with a parliamentary majority. Whether you're a minister, whether you're a DG, whether you're a premier, across provinces,
you're in trouble.
You will be in trouble.
Already we're seeing with Zizi Kota.
Exactly.
Already we're seeing with the former Speaker of Parliament. We're already seeing...
You're seeing the roosters are coming home to roost, or whatever that phrase is, right? That we can't institutionally protect you.
Yeah.
Therefore, you're now becoming a liability.
You have to go.
To the party.
You have to go.
You're becoming a public liability, so you have to go.
Do you believe in a theory that says once the DA comes into power, this is just a call on my show, I said once the DA gets into power together with the ANC, the DA is going to overpower the ANC, not by anything else, but by the narrative that they're delivering, which is what they've done in the Western Cape. The narrative that says we run these things better. And over time, that's going to erode the support of the ANC in the long run. Let me rephrase my question. Do you think a government of national unity will work for or against the ANC?
Oh, against them. Because how do you claim a victory?
Because it's...
Like, how are you going to claim unity as a victory when there's still no water?
In the long run? In the next election?
So in the next election, you can only sell... I don't think they're trying to go to the next election. I really think this unity is, how do we keep the center together over the next year?
Really?
I really think it is. How do we make sure that Ramaphosa gets past this 1 year? The big thing is, so there's two things that are coming up that are really, really important. So we talked about the confidence. The other thing is the supply thing. So new parliament gets elected. We're going to have a budget speech, right? So we can figure out what the budget looks like for the rest of the year. So it's a mini budget speech. But it'll be the first time in democratic South Africa where we're voting on the budget.
It's never happened.
It's never happened. Before it was a tick box exercise because the ANC had a majority. They have to approve of the budget. This would be the first time that National Treasury needs to negotiate with other parties about what we're doing. This first confidence thing will get them past that. The next hurdle is, can we get to the second budget in Feb? The real powerful budget. One.
Yes.
If we get through that one, then we're already to 2026. Like we're on our way at that point. We're good to go. I really think GNU is really about stabilizing the short term to make sure that the country keeps on going. ANC saves face through those mechanisms.
Shouldn't they be looking at the next election?
That's where I think you then expect, remember I said the GNU is people opting out. You say, no, you don't like the opt-outs. So that we can eventually come down to who is the coalition partners we have to work with, that we can then work with over the long term. I think that strategy then makes sense because then you've whittled down all your opponents, but you keep the key ones. So you essentially say, they stuck with us, they've shown confidence. We can then build a legislative agenda with you.
Let's go.
Over the next 3 years. Let's see what we can do. At that point, the ANC then needs to start thinking about how do we make sure that whatever wins come out of here, they are our wins
Jeez.
that we can claim. You don't want the DA or the EFF saying, no, but we also did that.
We contributed.
We contributed to 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Or MK implodes.
That's that a possibility?
Those voters need to, if MK hasn't even had an elective conference yet.
Well, they
must have an elective conference.
It's a
But
technicality.
it's not about the core leadership, right?
It's about the
branch leadership all the way down
to
and
the,
how do
the
you,
councillor.
to the councillor, and how do you divvy up the spoils of war?
Whoa.
Like, how do you do that? That will be their greatest test.
I spoke about the possible implosion of the MK because I feel it's holding on to JZ's power.
Yeah.
Only.
Yeah.
Nothing else. And on its own, it's almost similar in some form. And I know IFP rather has done okay in this election, but it held on to literally one guy's power. They even put
Mangosuthu's face on their shirts with the campaigning.
I asked in this very room, I asked the leader of IFP, and he said, we are honoring him. But the reality of it is, you should be in a position to hold this thing on your own now.
This is the question. I think they'll survive.
MK.
I think they'll survive. Just talking to them, sharp individuals there. There's some really,
so they'll be all right.
I think if they can hold the center, they'll be fine. But I think the ANC will be looking at MK. If your belief is we didn't lose this election, we lost to MK. The assumption is how do we get those votes
back? Yeah.
Without getting the bad apples with them. Well, we make sure they implode. You must put your own spies there. You must go do something. But how do you make them implode, or how do you wait for them to implode if they do? And then how do you get those voters back?
I want to rush. You're leaving soon. You wrote a book before your PhD.
Yeah.
About the rainbow.
Yeah.
What was it called again?
Breaking a rainbow. Building a nation.
There's a phrase in there that you speak of that was said by who is it again? Ubabu Desmond Tutu. Speaking about how the rainbow is a spiritual position of the country.
Yes.
It's a spiritual position of the country. As a country, we are together in this rainbow thing. Yeah. Have we lived up to that?
Well, I make the argument in the book of where I say, I disagree with my colleagues. I think the Rainbow Nation is the perfect description of our country.
Okay.
As a metaphor, it is so perfect. I don't think we even realize how perfect it is. Because when I look at a rainbow in the sky, it's this really beautiful thing. It's really beautiful.
First and foremost,
it's beautiful. Then when you look at the rainbow, you see these 7 colors. But these 7 colors run in parallel with each other. They never mix. They never intersect. They never get all jumbled up together. They always stay in their lane. When you look very carefully, there's like a white hue in between each color, as if the only mechanism for you to come together is if whiteness is there. And I said, that's our country right there. That's the Rainbow Nation. Now the question is, we can either sit back and treat our country as like, oh my God, look how beautiful it is. Or we take that acknowledgement of, we are a beautiful country, but we're extremely divided. And if we don't acknowledge that, bad things tend to happen in countries that don't acknowledge how divided
they are.
Right? And it will slowly build up in one way or another. I hate seeing it when it's like sporting occasions. Because I also talk about in the book that the only times like South Africans really mix is at the workplace and at sporting occasions and shopping malls.
Other than that,
outside of that,
we go to different homes.
We go to our different homes, our different places. We never intermix outside of that. And sporting occasions, like 2 sports. Really, not shame. Netball has really changed things. I give netball some respect, actually. But it really was like cricket and rugby at the end of the day.
Not even soccer.
Yeah. Would you know white person's going to PSL? So that was the logic of the book was not about dividing the country, but being really realistic about how divided we are and the types of conversations we need to have about bringing ourselves back together on an equal playing field. Not one grouping saying, just accept it, or one grouping saying, we want you out of the country.
Yeah.
Right?
Because there's there's a notion that also speaks to how Rainbow Nation doesn't have black.
Is that
There's no black in Rainbow Nation. Already we're automatically
already excluded ourselves with that metaphor.
And yet there's also a notion that says in our divisions, some are many, are bigger in number, so they should get the bigger share of the color. I
buy that. So I always tell my students this. So I have got what I call heuristics. When I'm trying to figure out a policy problem in the country, I've got 3 heuristics. One, if it's a social problem, I remind myself that the majority of the country is conservative Christian. When I remember that, I'm this explains many things. If it's an economic issue that I'm struggling to figure out, my heuristic is, we're the most unequal country in the world. Therefore, I can probably use inequality to explain what's happening. And the third one is that I need to constantly remind myself that people of color in this country are not just a majority, but are a firm majority. We're 92% of the country. 92% of the country. But our perceptions in urban areas in particular is if this number is equal, that it feels as if we're 50-50. That we're super unified. Whereas there's just a very firm minority that doesn't know it's a minority. And I always use the line in my classes, which is, in other countries, minority groups know that they're a minority group and they behave in that manner. And it's about not, am I allowed to swear? No, not annoying the majority. You mind your business.
We're not like that in South Africa.
We're not like that at all. And because of that inequality, and you can also add that kind of conservative Christian element as well that creates interesting modes of organization.
Level of respect and all of that.
But the money aspect is so obscene. Can I say one last thing? Just as an example of this. I always use this as, how much do you think is the average salary of a teacher in the country? Roundabout number. It's around 20K.
Yes.
It's about 20K. Right? Average teacher. We're not talking about IEB, this. 20K. In our country, based off stats from the Liberty Institute at UCT back in 2021, just during COVID, came out and said, in our country, and they still have this calculator on their website, you can go there yourself. If you earn 20,000 Rand in this country per month, you're part of the top 5% income earners in the country.
Because the lower number is so big.
People, we struggle to comprehend how bad inequality is in
South Africa.
It's because it's so, no other country, I mean, there are other countries, but they don't count the stats the same way. In a country that counts inequality stats the way we do, it is so large. And we've normalized it to such a degree that we don't even recognize it anymore. And so long as you have that type of inequality that exists, and anyone who's watching this will be 20,000 Rand is not a lot of money.
Yeah.
20,000 Rand per month is not, this is before tax as well. So tax must still also come off.
So
you must now pay for rent.
Yeah, take home is probably 13
something.
Rands.
And now you've got a family that you must feed, school fees, all that.
Extended family members.
Extended family members.
You name it.
People don't realize the type of inequality. We forget about it too easily because it's become normalized.
And we shouldn't forget it because it's so glaring. It's glaring when you get off the plane in Cape Town.
You see it. It's in your face constantly.
All the time.
But I think it's a coping mechanism for those who live in spaces where we can ignore it.
Yeah.
Whereas the vast majority is, I can't ignore it.
It's me. It's
me.
Yes.
I'm here.
Yes.
And I talk about in the book that one of the biggest kind of lies we were told was this kind of born free. That there are people, I have 3 groupings of young people. I say there's coconuts, and I count myself in that group, right?
Coconuts were born from a family that gave them opportunities.
Gave you an opportunity.
Yeah.
Not even that. It wasn't that. It was more, you're in a family, but you have access to spaces.
Okay, yeah.
You have access to spaces of power, of privilege that almost guarantee where your life will be.
Cool, got you.
Based of how unequal the country is, how it's economically structured. You were just born into it. This is your life. There's no fault of your own. However, they're also, funnily enough, some of the best kind of mobilizes antagonists in this country as well. Because they come with capital.
True.
Both political, social, they can move between spaces.
Yeah.
So you can't ignore them, but you also need to be very careful. I think the question asked is, can coconuts be trusted with the revolution?
True.
The main groupings, though, because coconuts is like such a small minority, is that we then say, well, everyone is born free. And I say, statistically speaking, there's a very few amount of people who are born free. If you're young in this country and you're born in poverty, you die in poverty. There's no like if, buts, or maybes about it. That the vast majority of young people in this country are born into bondage.
Yeah.
You're not born free.
Their life stays that way.
It stays exactly how it is. And we are now seeing that as our country has already created a lost generation. If you'd been unemployed in this country in your 20s, 10 years ago, it's most likely you're still unemployed now.
Yeah.
You'll stay unemployed into your 40s.
Sure.
Lost generation.
And after that, you can't get a job.
There's no, even if the company, this is why the government can frustrate me of like, no, when we get the economy functioning again,
we'll get you jobs.
We'll get you jobs. And I say, you can't keep someone out of a job for 20 years, 15 to 20 years. And then when the economy is finally functioning, that they are a productive individual
They're
in society.
50 now. And you're saying there's a job
Like,
for
what
you.
do we, like, what skills are they bringing to the table?
Sure.
How are they contributing? What is their base?
Wow.
The longer we stay in this economic quagmire that we find ourselves in, the longer we create this lost generation, and it balloons and it gets bigger. And all the evidence shows us that July unrest will be the tip of the iceberg.
There's a phrase that is said very often of an unled revolution.
Yeah?
It's a phrase that's said a lot.
It could be that.
Yeah.
Unless someone figures out how to galvanize young people.
India had an election. They were able to turn it around quickly.
Especially with 1 billion people.
1 billion people had a quick election. Not quick, obviously.
It was a couple of days.
Yes, it took the same. And theirs took a few days, not one day.
Yeah.
And the majority, or the big party, Modi's party, did not win outright. Similar to the ANC. It's actually a seismic in some form.
Yes, no, it was huge. Modi thought he was
politics.
going to get a majority.
Absolutely. Like, he was confident.
Yeah.
And he walked in there, big slap in the face. But he was able to turn it around and form a government almost immediately. What is our problem? Same decision. We can do the same.
He was decisive.
Why is it that ANC and EFF can't just come together and go on?
Because they're not decisive. No, EFF, I think EFF would do it. I think they would do it.
So
I think it's the ANC
it's
that
an
doesn't.
ANC thing. Yes.
I think the ANC doesn't want to do it. I think, again, cold outside the ANC. You can't leave and then show us up and then you must come back and call you back and you must become a leader. You're out of your mind after we fought with, like, we're friends with you, but like you left for a reason and we stayed and we fought. You know that argument.
We must also remember that Julius didn't leave.
He was kicked out. He was exiled to Limpopo.
And also he's not a faction.
So
he left alone and then started this from the ground all on his own.
So I always call out EFF for this because I was part of that youth league. I was part of Malema's youth league.
Okay.
Where, if you were to look at the map, because remember when he left, it wasn't like the youth league was like, the entire youth league was disbanded.
True.
So all of us didn't have branches.
And it stayed that way for a while.
It stayed that way for a while. Where the EFF grew, you can almost see it. Where there was an ANC youth league branch,
they came out. Okay.
Their branches came out of the ashes of ANC Youth League branches. Now, I know some of them will disagree with me. It's fine. But that model worked for them. That it was disgruntled, almost my generation, not that I can claim anything, but like, who felt betrayed by Gwede in particular for disbanding the Youth League the way it was disbanded. We essentially then came back and said, no. We'll go with this other force
You'll
of
pay
nature.
For this.
Because it's that first internal dissent in the ANC outside, that formulated itself outside of party structures. Polokwane was the first major moment of dissent. This was the next one that said, we don't want to be amongst this system. I hate when people kind of like assume like EFF is just going to be corrupt and this and this and this. All parties could be corrupt.
Yeah.
It's neither here nor there. But their logic is they're still outside. And I think ANC knows this, that these are old ANC people. EFF now is 10 years plus. They can adequately say, our membership are not old ANC Youth League people.
There's some new kids.
We've got new people.
Yeah.
We've galvanized a young vote. But I think those within the ANC look at them as, no, but we know where your origins come from. And we don't forget that.
Is there still growth potential for EFF?
100%. So long as there's marginalized youth in this country, the problem that the EFF has isn't getting new votes, it's about keeping votes. For the EFF, they lose voters as they get older. EFF's message doesn't translate to a 30-year-old who's has a job, who's paying taxes, and doesn't want to lose their taxes.
People
grow out, and they know this. They've got a hard cap. It's about 28, 29, where there's this rapid drop in their voter base, right? EFF, once they figure that out about how to keep voters on, regardless of what they say, their ideological, their kind of revolutionary rhetoric, to keep you on board, even as you become financially or economically secure, will be the biggest saving grace for them. The reason why I say this, sorry, my nose is a bit blocked, but the reason why I say this is that it gives them the opportunity to win back metros in particular.
Because that's where economic activity is.
They can't beat the ANC one-on-one in a rural province. They just can't do it.
Accept that.
The closest they'll get is what they have in Northwest. They can't even do it in Limpopo in particular. They can't get their growth there. In fact, MK started eating their lunch there, which is a whole other story.
Yeah.
So if you don't figure that out in particular, because they vote, that grouping of young people, 100% vote. If you can't figure out how to keep them amongst your ranks as they become more economically prosperous, you'll always kind of have this hard ceiling. You'll lack a level of kind of political leverage that you'll have from that community. You'll have them shouting, saying, we love you, this. But then they get into a voting station and they vote DA.
Or ANC.
Yeah. And once they figure that out, their growth, I think, is beautiful. I think it'd be amazing.
They say very clearly that open borders did not damage them. I have a theory. And I think it's the positioning of the branding again of the open border concept.
Yeah.
It wasn't branded correctly. To those, even those that understand it.
Yeah.
That really what you're saying is, for you as a family that's doing well, to really prosper, you have to help your neighbors prosper.
Yeah.
Very simple concept, makes sense on paper, but they never say it that way.
Yeah.
Because it carries this phrasing that says open border, United Africa. Do you think it worked against them? Because I see it as a branding issue more than it is. Reposition the way you're saying it, you're likely to get people seeing it differently.
Yeah, I mean, my argument was no. And then it followed the same logic of what Malema said, no, it didn't harm us, because then EFF would have grown.
Okay.
Right? That argument is
everyone would have grown.
Yeah, everyone would have grown. And then PA stands up saying, yeah, we did.
We got those people.
We got them.
Yeah.
But PA is very specific about where they got their votes from, how they got them, and who they were talking to. So they're a bit of an outlier. Whether it hurt them or not, what I liked about it was doubling down on principle rather than political expediency. They've been pushed on this. I mean, all the way back to Operation Dudula, which really, Operation Dudula really should have been angry with the ANC.
True.
But for whatever reason, found their fascination with the EFF. And we know that's not by accident as well. But that's a story for another day, right? Really pushed them. And the EFF almost budged at that point. You could see they were sweating.
Yeah.
But
then Julius stood up strong and
said, this is a principled position that follows our 7 cardinal pillars. It all falls back. And I love the EFF because they're consistent about it. The ANC used to have the NDR, but now it's what is the NDR? What?
Some people don't
the
even
7
know
cardinal sitters.
They don't change.
They're consistent.
They can recite them.
And it falls in line with, we cannot succeed as a country if the continent doesn't succeed.
True. Yeah.
And if the continent is not succeeding, then we as a country will forever be getting individuals who are looking to be saved by us as well.
That's it. This story will never change.
And everyone thinks it's a Pan-Africanist, this. It is 100% a Pan-Africanist argument. It's one I deeply believe in as a decolonial scholar. But it's also a good old-fashioned liberal policy as well.
It says...
The liberal policies, it's United States A1 thing of like, if we fix democracies that side, they don't come to our country.
Yeah, if we fight their wars.
If we fight their wars,
never bother us.
they won't come here, essentially.
Yeah.
These two logics are the same. They have different principled stances, but the logic is still the same of we need to think of ourselves as a united continent. Otherwise, we're losing this fight as a continent.
But did they brand it that way?
I don't think they did.
Yeah.
But it's a hard thing to brand as well. Vis-a-vis, they're stealing your jobs.
But then again, don't brand it by saying open borders.
I would double down with it. I think that message is more important. Otherwise, what game are we playing?
It's an important message.
Yeah.
I hear it and I completely understand it. But then in marketing and communication, which is my area of specialty, I would say you walk away with how this thing made you feel.
Yes, but you don't walk away with like...
No.
Yeah.
I walk away with how this... I remember this guy saying, I like Julius, I like Floyd, I want to vote for them. But if I do, it means I agree with open borders. That guy is saying, I like them, but I don't agree with this thing. And he doesn't want to decode it and understand it. He's saying open borders. That's what he calls it. That's why I say it's a branding issue more than it is a reality.
Yeah.
Like, and this guy says, if I vote for it, it means I agree with it.
So, small counter. And it would be, what if someone walked up to the EFF and said, you know, I like you, Floyd. I like you, Malema, but I don't like this thing, land expropriation.
Okay. Can use anyone.
The EFF will say, it's fine, go. And that's why, if it is that consistency ensures, and this is the biggest difference between like EFF and like MK, is that I know that EFF's ideological and principled message travels across the whole country.
True.
Because it's consistent. It is, we don't budge on this. And I think it will either be their best comparative advantage or their biggest weakness for exactly what you said, right? And they need to make a choice. I mean, they need to make many choices, but they need to make a choice going forward about, do we just simply communicate this better? Or do we double down on political expediency and say, let's stop kind of mentioning this. We'll deal with this when we're in power, which is a good strategy to take.
Yeah.
Or do you die on this hill?
And accept it.
And accept it.
Yeah.
Because this issue of xenophobia is not going anywhere in the country. Right? And I don't know which one they would take. I like the stance that they've taken. Not many political parties in this country consistently. It's like them and ACDP. ACDP never shifts on their principles.
They want to hang criminals.
Exactly.
They're not changing. I can go on forever, as you can tell.
Yeah.
And you're late already for your next appointment. But I truly appreciate this. And let's see what happens. Whatever politicians and political analysts speak of now, it's speculative.
Yeah.
Nothing else is. We are likely to only see this in a few days.
Yeah.
Are we likely to have a sitting of parliament?
Yes.
Let's see what happens.
It'll happen. Even I know like MK doesn't want to come, but like
they don't form a correct.
Yeah, the numbers don't make sense. I saw some report that like their flights have been cancelled.
Yeah.
I think there'll be a lot of drama on the day.
Of course.
But we'll have a seating of the National Assembly.
And it'll be big enough to elect the president.
The question is, do we have a government and a firm government that has a long-term plan, or do we have a government that is for the next 2 months? That's the real question for me that I'm looking for.
We're all hoping for a firm government.
Ideally, otherwise it's that, or we'll just go back in 90 days. I think the IEC came out today and said if we had to have another election, it will take us 90 days. That's 90 days of a bigger vacuum.
Are we having a vacuum now? I know everyone is still in their positions.
Well, technically the Chief Justice is the president right now, the Speaker of the House. So he's the most high-ranking individual in the country up until that moment where they swear in. No, sorry. The president is still the president. Right? There's no vacuum. There's
there can never be a vacuum in South African
The only
politics.
vacuum is those 2 seconds when he gets sworn in again.
When it's quick.
Yes.
It
That's
happens
the only
literally.
vacuum.
Yes.
So there's no vacuum at all.
Yeah.
But in that context of the 90 days, if those 90 days are sparked by a vote of no confidence in the president, then you have a vacuum. Because whatever new president you get in doesn't have a mandate from electoral vote and doesn't have a mandate from one party that has a majority.
Do we have an impression of a vacuum right now?
I don't think so. I think Cyril Ramaphosa has enough gravitas amongst citizens to know that he's still president. He's still president. I don't think anyone is sitting back. I mean, it's a very lonely cabinet meeting he's having by himself.
Yes.
But I think there's no vacuum in terms of. So remember that first question you asked was like, do people know government? And the big one here is knowing the difference between government and the state. That there is no government in its purest form. Like it's still there. Like the civil service is still there. But the state doesn't go. The state is always omnipresent. That doesn't disappear. And that keeps us from having a vacuum.
Yeah.
And right now, as the head of state, I think Ramaphosa is making sure that we don't believe there's a vacuum.
True. He's active.
Yeah.
He was in the news yesterday. He went to KZN or the floods, and he's active to say, I'm still in charge.
Yes.
Don't get it twisted. I'm still... He can call a meeting of... what is this thing that he does? His family meetings.
Yeah,
he
right now.
Call another one. And
hopefully
just say,
no one will accuse him of saying he's politicking now.
but let's be honest. Let's be honest.
If you were the president at that time, would you not do it?
It's like Modi in India. He was giving people food parcels with his face on the plastic bag. What is that?
It's just
the
politics.
day before elections.
It's just, but now you want like an email notification to say, this is what, I had no issues with it.
You didn't.
I had no issues. I thought it was fine.
I had issues with the content.
The content I had issues with.
That's it.
That I did have issues.
When I saw it, it's like, all right, okay.
I was like,
talking.
He's talking.
Let's find out.
The content, I was like, you're saying things, and I was like, I mean, a lot of these things is fine. Also, a lot of them are a few lies that you
He spoke about the Guptas. The Guptas became a thing. Like state capture became a core of his message. It almost sounded like a jab at MK, a jab at and a performance appraisal.
Honestly.
For me, it's like, dude, you can talk all you want. You're a president. You can talk to us every morning for all you care.
But at least give us something good.
Hey, man, thank you.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
I can talk to you every day. We can do this every day.
Yeah.
No wonder they love you so much.
I don't know about that.
Thank you again.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate
it. I think your dad is a cool guy.
I think he's a cool guy as well.
We've been watching him and hearing from him, so to speak, in media platforms for a long time.
He's also so consistent with me because like when we chat about like technical things.
Yeah.
But none of us ever crossed that Chinese wall.
Really?
And I'm like, even if I like pushed, he would just give me that look of like, no, you see, you're going too far.
Because he's still there. In the system.
Yeah. And he deeply believes in it. Deeply, deeply believes. That party is his heart and soul. And I love that for him so much. And I always function as the conduit of like, let me just be that little devil on your ear. Just to make sure that you're constantly aware of what the criticisms are on the outside. Because he was on the outside for a long time.
He was. Was it during the Zuma years?
Yeah, during the Zuma years. He was on the outside. He was brought back into the inside. And what you don't want is to drink the Kool-Aid whilst you're in the inside.
Which happens very easily.
Which happens so easily. So we just function as like kind of balancing force for him as
Interesting. I was in a brief chat with a very senior ANC politician, and the conversation was about that. Was about how there's a disconnect between these guys who are in protection and BMWs with lights and the reality on the ground. And he spoke very clearly that, it's very easy to lose the connection where your door is opened for you. Every time you come, people stand up and all sorts of nonsense that happens. It's easy to lose it. And how do you keep it? It's by always going back to the ground deliberately.
Yeah.
To connect with the people on the ground. I saw Nomvula Mkonyane washing during the campaign, the door to door. And I said, sister, it doesn't even look real.
You're talking about the high level. I always used to make this joke. Remember I had mentioned that Tembisa branch of the ANC.
Yes.
I'm not sure if it's still the same. I haven't been there in a while. But their meetings would happen in a tent.
Already.
10, 12 kilometers down the road is the Midrand branch. Really like that branch as well. That's an active, good case example of what a good ANC branch is. But they meet in the Protea Hotel.
There at the corner.
Yeah.
Wait, off-ramp.
On the off-ramp.
Yes.
This is the exact same organization.
But look at how different.
they are.
And they are literally 4 kilometers away.
They're not far from each other. That is the broad church at its best, but also at its worst. But anyway.
Yeah, sorry, man. You're so late. I so apologize.
No, we're fine.
Yeah, I hope you find it in you. When you drive out, you don't say, damn,
Nah, I enjoyed
messed
the
my day
conversation.
up so badly. Thank you again. This is the last of our political conversations. I'm done with this stuff. And good luck, South Africans. We certainly hope everyone ends up with the country that they want and the country that they hope for, they wish for. But I want to say to South African politicians, think about South Africans first. I know it's easy to protect each other and so forth, but for the first time, think about us as South Africans, because we have no other way of holding you to account except at the elections.
Yeah.
And these elections has shown you that we don't quite trust you.
Yeah.
But we still want you to do something for us. That's it. It's such an uncomplicated relationship we have with South African politicians. So don't forget us while you're making decisions, because some of us think you forgot us at the Codesa, but it's another story. Thank you so much. Sharp. Dr. Chikane, you're a lecturer at Wits.
Yeah, Wits School of Governance. I'm as advertised. Please come to our school. There's all that jazz. Come study with us. But yeah.
It's a good place. It's a good place.
PhD students, master students, mostly government, but we're looking to diversify. But yeah, I'm a lecturer there.
Wow. Do you like it?
Best job in the whole world.
You'd
Honestly.
never get into...
I mean, I would do other things. I don't know what I would do. I am passionate about civil society as well.
Yeah.
I think I'm just passionate about making the country great.
A better place.
And just a better place. And I like making change at a kind of macro level. And I feel like by teaching, you can create a whole generation of people who kind of go off thinking about governance and how to make the country better.
Is there interest, like deep-rooted interest amongst the people you're teaching?
Yeah, but most of our students are civil servants themselves. All their hearts in the right place.
Yeah.
All of them just want...
So there's hope.
There's so much hope. And a lot of their issues is not about whether they're lazy or this. These are active individuals, but they hit a political wall.
Jeez.
It stops them from able to do their job. And more about how do you navigate that space. Hopefully it changes now with coalitions.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. There you have it.
King David Studio Podcast.